I'll pass on to Stuart for the call for the sederant and intimation of apologies, please.
Yep, thank you, Chair. So in terms of sederant, Councillor George Mayer.
Yeah.
Thank you. Councillor Ian Grant.
Present.
Thank you. Councillor Gordon Jenkins. I believe Councillor Jenkins may be joining us just shortly. Councillor John McFadgen. Okay. Councillor Maureen Mackay.
Present.
Thank you. I have an apology from Councillor Helen Coffey and Councillor John Campbell. Thank you. Councillor Jim Todd.
Yes, Stuart.
Yep, thank you. Councillor Sally Cogley.
Yes, here.
Yep, thank you. And I have apologies from Councillors John Bell and Elaine Dimbury. Thank you, Chair.
Thanks, Stuart. We move to the exclusion of public. Thank you. And declarations of interest. If anyone has any declarations to make, thank you. We'll move on then to the minutes of the previous meeting held on 2nd of September. I'd like to approve these as a correct record. Anyone, any matters arising from the minute? We'll move on then to the external audit, introduction by Joe McLaughlin and main report by Deloitte. Joe.
Thank you, Chair. Good morning, members. Just a very quick introduction from myself. I'm conscious that the last time I did this, Pat accused me of stealing his thunder, so I'll be fairly quick. Members, you know, this committee knows that external audit reports are presented here by our external auditors, and this report builds on the audit planning report that was presented to this committee in April of this year. This report is around the results from the audit of our annual accounts for 2021, and it picks up on some points that Pat will go into in detail, I would imagine, around heritage assets, which were lead to a recommendation in the report. You'll see that it's a second year when we have a material valuation uncertainty in respect of our properties that's being assessed and being added by our external valuer. It doesn't mean that the balance sheet and the values thereon are incorrect. It's just showing that because of external factors, predominantly to do with COVID, that there are issues. But finally, and just building on the work that our external auditors have done with us over the 4 years, you know, they continue to highlight the good practice in the council and the sound financial management and good governance arrangements that are in place. But Chair, I'll stop there and hand across to colleagues in Deloitte, please.
Thanks, Joe.
Good morning, everyone. I'll let my colleague Connor go through the report this morning, so I won't be accused of stealing Joe's thunder this time. Thanks.
Good morning, everyone. This report, as Joe mentioned, covers the financial statements. The work on the audit dimensions was presented in June, so I won't propose to cover those again, although they are referenced within the report. I think when you think about this audit and the accounts process, it's important to bear in mind the context and very challenging set of circumstances for everyone involved. There's continued remote working with the full impact of COVID-19 this year on the actual numbers in the accounts. There was new auditing standards, reduced materiality across audits, new balances in scope, and so on. So we're very grateful to the accounts for working so proactively with us. We have achieved a sign-off in both 2019-20 and 2021 in September without using extensions. For context, their extension was given until November in both years for the sign-off of the accounts. And in 2019-20, even against that extended timeline, only 80% of audits were signed off. So it's quite an achievement for the council to be able to sign these off in September in both years. Page 4 of our report sets out the key conclusions arising from our testing. In general, it's an unmodified audit opinion, which is a clean opinion on the accounts, as well last year, and there does % of local authorities in Scotland this year. Apologies, Peter, I've actually broken up slightly there. There have been a number of adjustments identified through the audit report. So there's 5 adjustments, 7 disclosure changes, and 2 control findings. They're set out in the body of the report. And it's important to note that all of these have been corrected by management. One adjustments relates to an event after the reporting period, and one of the disclosure changes is an item we found across our local authority audits, not specific to East Ayrshire Council. Page 8 sets out the quality indicators, which essentially are areas where management can impact on the quality and efficiency of the audit that the council itself receives. I'd like to point out here that the annual accounts themselves are a really good document. They're very user-friendly. They include a lot of information in a very engaging manner. There's infographics, tables, pictures, and so on. And there's signposting through links to where more information can be found. The document itself is an honest and fair reflection of the achievements of the council as well as the challenges that it faces. However, there are a number of areas for improvement here, and we've had early discussions on these with management in regards to preparation for 21-22 at council audit process, and we work together with them to facilitate a smooth process. Given the discussions we've had, we don't expect the issues we've identified in relation to the accounting judgments or the number of adjustments to recur in 21-22. On page 10, we highlight a change in our materiality. That is just due to the adjustments and the control findings. We revisit our materiality and reduce the level that we set for determining sample sizes and analytical procedures to make sure we obtain enough evidence to support the audit opinion. Just to be clear, this is obviously not ideal, but it's not entirely unprecedented. I have another audit currently underway that this has happened to it as well, so it's not entirely unprecedented. On page 11, we set out the significant risks. In the audit plan, we identified 2 significant risks, being recognition of COVID-19 income and management overrider controls. During the audit, we revisited our risk assessment in light of new information and determined that the completeness and existence of the heritage assets also presented a significant risk. Page 12 sets out the work on COVID-19 income. There's 2 adjustments in relation to that, one being to the primary statements and one being to a disclosure. The adjustment itself arose essentially due to a lack of clarity in the guidance on how to treat specific amounts relating to the thank you payment for social care staff. On page 13 to 15, we set our work on the management overrider controls. We checked transactional estimates as set out on page 14 and 15. We identified an adjustment in relation to property, plant and equipment due to a calculation error in the allocation of revaluations, and made a disclosure change in relation to provisions so that they're separately identified on the face of the balance sheet. On page 16 and 17, we set out the detail on a new significant risk on heritage assets, and we performed a comprehensive set of procedures to gain assurance over these. This included the council performing a full count of the assets which they hold, internal audit performing an initial review, and then ourselves performing a separate count. We held discussions with other auditors, we reviewed other local authorities, we considered controls over the assets, we reviewed the internal experts' work, and we reviewed the advice provided to the council by SIPTA in this manner. Following these procedures, it was confirmed that the absolute number of assets held within the council's collection was substantially less than what the council itself believed. However, the financial impact of this was an immaterial adjustment of 0.747 million. An audit adjustment, a disclosure change, and a control deficiency were raised in light of the work on heritage assets. Management have corrected and accepted these, and further work is planned in 21-22. So we do not consider it likely that the issues identified this year will recur next year. Page 18 to 20 set out the work on the council's pension, the council's expenditure, and the charitable trusts, and just to confirm, we identified no issues in any of these. Page 21 sets out the detail on the 2 control findings that we found. Page 31 to 34 sets out the detail behind the audit adjustments, and page 35 sets out the specific actions to address these. The takeaway for us really is that all adjustments have been corrected and management have plans in place to address the control findings. Finally, just bring to your attention that Audit Scotland published their annual review of college public audit in Scotland every year. That was published earlier this summer. In summary, the targeted level of quality is being met by all auditors in 67% of cases. In Deloitte, the target has been achieved in 100% of times. So hopefully that provides some assurance to the committee as well about the quality audit that you receive as a council. Happy to take any questions that you have.
Thanks for that, Connor. I'm pleased to say that you're happy, and in fact that Joe managed to bring the work in time, which is a credit to not only Joe but to the whole department. Members, do we have any questions, comments? Thank you. I don't see anything. Perhaps if we could address the on page 6, sorry, page 8 of your report about the heritable assets. I take it from what you've said that you're happy now with the situation. The discrepancies, if that's no stronger word, that you found have been corrected, and that you're quite happy with the situation now. Is that correct?
Yes, that's correct. So we performed quite a lot of work, and the council did quite a lot of work on this. There was lots of phone calls and lots of work undertaken by ourselves, by the Leisure Trust, by the council, and by internal audit. So I think, to be honest, it's not really possible to get much more assurance than what we've obtained now. So yes, we're happy now with the position.
Thank you. Joe, you getting it?
Thank you, Chair. I would just like to thank all colleagues in Finance and ICT across the Council, as well as Connor and Pat and the team. I think, as Connor touched on, it has been a challenging year in terms of the annual accounts, more so this year than, believe it or not, last year at the beginning of the pandemic. We've achieved the deadlines, and that's important because we then lead into other work. But I just want to record my thanks, but also in terms of heritage assets. I mean, I think it was something that you know, we were all generally unhappy about. I'm grateful to colleagues in internal audit who deployed rapidly to assist us, but also with Connor and the team as well. And going forward, that relationship that we have will continue as we go through and don't just stop here with heritage assets, but begin to build that further assurances in the months ahead.
Thanks, Joe. We now move on, members, to item 5 in the agenda, which is the internal audit for the integrated joint board from Ailey. Okay.
Thank you, Chair, and good morning, everybody. As you know, this is the regular annual report, which I bring up each, well, obviously an annual report I'll bring up each year to G&S committee. And it's really to give G&S an oversight of the internal audit work that is carried out for the IJB. So if I can just highlight some aspects in the report. In paragraph number 7, it was just a reminder for us all about how we share the IJB reports. Now, all of the reports that I'll refer to this morning are available for elected members and all of the members of the IJB. So our elected members have the choice of either going to the Councillors' Notice Board or the Community Planning Partnership portal. Reports are held in both places to allow for maximum access by all relevant members of Council or IJB. So if I move on to talk about the annual report, which we produced for 2021. And I'll be using similar language to the language that Connor just used. We need to carry out sufficient work in order to produce an annual opinion for the IJB. So it was a challenging year, particularly challenging year for our colleagues in health and social care. And as much as we could, we tried to be sympathetic to that, and I hope we were. And we worked around their availability, and the engagement with internal audit continued, and I was very pleased with that. Work was interrupted from time to time, but we all just got on with it. So happy to say we did carry out sufficient work in order to produce an annual opinion for the IJB, and that annual opinion continued to be an annual opinion of reasonable assurance. And just to give you a flavour of the work that we carried out in 2021, we looked at the action plan that had resulted from the IJB's self-assessment against the proposals set out by the Ministerial Strategic Group in terms of improvement actions for the delivery of integration across Scotland. And we actually continue to do work in that important area. We also carried out work last year around risk management arrangements, and that was a continuing piece of work to follow up on actions, and that included looking at the risk appetite of the IJB, which is an important area for such a complex service delivery area. We also looked at lead partnership arrangements, and that was across Ayrshire in collaboration with our colleagues in North and South. And as you know, the internal audit work for the IJB is carried out not only by my team. I'm the Chief Auditor for the IJB, but I rely on the work not only by my team in the Council, but by the internal audit team in the NHS, who we work with very closely. And that NHS team in 2021 carried out a review of delayed discharges focusing on reporting arrangements. So all of the work, all of the individual pieces of work that we carried out resulted in reasonable assurance or equivalent. The annual opinion is one of reasonable assurance. All of the detailed assignment reports that I've referred to this morning are available on Councillors' Notice Board and on the CPP portal, and they're considered in detail by the IGIB's Audit Committee, which you know is the Audit and Performance Committee. So if I move on to paragraph 17, which is external audits reports to the IGIB. So external audit have concluded all of their reporting for the IGIB. Each year they will assess the work of internal audit, and to date there have been no issues raised with regards to the internal audit work that's carried out for the IGIB. So long may that continue, and we work hard to make sure that's the case. If I can move on, Chair, to paragraph 18. So I've talked about last year, I'm now going to talk about the current year. So the internal audit plan for 21-22 was agreed by the IGIB Audit and Performance Committee on the 1st of June. And we've presented that in summary at paragraph 19. So you'll see there are a number of continuing themes there as we work with the IGIB around their action plan, connected with the Ministerial Strategic Group recommendations, and work that we're doing around directions, which again is part of the National Strategic Direction around IGIBs, with particular work being carried out with Scottish Government in Ayrshire, and particularly in East Ayrshire. We have yet, you'll see at section D, at part 2 in the table at paragraph 19, there are 30 days set aside by the NHS internal auditors to support the IGIB. It's not unusual for that work not to have been decided at this point in the year, and we take a collaborative approach across Ayrshire to agree the area that the NHS internal auditors will focus on. So that will be carried out in the second half of the year. That work will be carried out prior to the closure of this year. So just to move on, paragraph 20 just highlights that collaborative work. We work very well together in Ayrshire, as you know. The 3 chief auditors of the councils, who are the 3 IGIB chief auditors, we have regular pan-Ayrshire chief auditors meetings, and the IGIB is a standing item, along with a number of other areas, as you can imagine. We also work well with the internal auditors of NHS Ayrshire and Arran. That service is currently delivered by Grant Thornton, and we've got a particularly good partner at Grant Thornton who we have regular engagement with and works very well. So there are no barriers between us. We all work together. We're all working for the same people at the end of the day. If I move on to risk implications, Chair, just to highlight paragraph 26, the risks for our internal audit work are the same year in, year out. I suppose a wee bit brought into a bit of stark relief around COVID. We've had some of our audit staff have had to self-isolate, but we've had no significant impact on resourcing, I'm happy to say. And again, you know, hopefully that will continue. And we're certainly, we can manage that to a certain extent, but we are small teams, so small teams can be vulnerable to sick absence and the impact of any sick absence. So we would be flagging that up to the chair of the IGIB Audit and Performance Committee immediately if we ever got to a critical position around that. So that's everything from me this morning, Chair. So as always, happy to take questions. Thank you.
Thanks, Ailey, for your usual comprehensive report. I'd like to place in record our thanks to the groups, as you said, both the internal audit here and the other local authorities and the health board for the work that they've carried on despite all the problems with COVID, etc. Members, I'm going to throw open any questions for Ailey. Councillor Cogley.
Yes, thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you, Ailey, for your report. It's that's good reading, and it's absolutely clear that the Ayrshire's do work together very well. Do you know how well that compares with joint boards elsewhere? And I'm bringing this up, of course, because we're looking at the care service, and I think it's something that quite a lot of us feel strongly about. So it would be interesting if we could get some take from you as to how you think we compare things. Thank you.
Okay. Councillor, interesting question. Good question. We carry out benchmarking from time to time through our National Chief Auditors group, and although a lot of the feedback I get tends to be anecdotal, we do tend to be, I think, on the front foot with our collaborative approach in Ayrshire, but that's actually very reflective of the way in which the chief officers in our health and social care partnership work. So we reflect that wider culture that I think is well established in Ayrshire. I think we work particularly well in East Ayrshire. I have regular meetings with Craig. There's an open door, and it's a real open door. We're very honest. We have honest conversations. So I think that works well for us. I think more widely, in terms of internal audit, there are very good long-standing, well before the IJB, long-standing collaborative arrangements for internal audit in Ayrshire. And, it's a relatively small place at the end of the day. We all know each other quite well. A lot of us have worked together across various organisations. There's a trust there. There's a trust and a respect there. And I think that these are, the key values in that culture. I think that came through particularly for me in the IJB work that we did this year and the work we do through the NHS. But I think also in Ayrshire that was demonstrated through the three councils' response to the risk around the COVID grants. And I think that's showed the strong trust and working relationships that we have. But I would just go back and just say it's very much part of the culture and encouraged, certainly in East Ayrshire, by our IJB and by Craig, our head of the Health and Social Care Partnership. So I hope that goes some way to answering your question.
Thanks, Ailey. Any more questions, members? I don't see anyone. Can I refer you then to the recommendations, paragraph 2 on page 46. Recommended that we note the various aspects of the report. Is that agreed? Don't see any dissension, so that's fine. I can take it as agreed. Thanks, members. We can now move on to item 6 on the agenda, the Health and Social Care Partnership, the annual report from Craig. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair, and good morning, members. Thank you very much for having us along again. This is the third time I've brought this report, which is essentially an annual update on the work of our Strategic Commissioning Board. And the reason we bring it is just to allow governance and scrutiny to note the work that's been progressed by the Commissioning Board, which is taken forward through the auspices of the Audit and Performance Committee of the IJB. Even during the last year, when things have been a bit tumultuous, as we've all reflected on already this morning, the Commissioning Board did meet on 8 separate occasions during 2020-21 and continues to meet now. We've actually got a meeting this afternoon as well, so this work has continued unabated. We've seen a number of applications to the Transformation Fund where those were considered and in most cases funding provided. We've also had a schedule of reporting on the existing programmes and activities just to allow us to get a really good understanding of the work that has been taken forward and to make sure that it did align with what we first agreed to fund through the Commissioning Board. As well as that, we've had regular updates on the Best Value Service Review programme, and again we'll reflect a wee bit on that as we go through this report, but there's a few delays in there, but again that's continued pretty much unabated through the last year as well. The tables at paragraphs 4 and 8 provide just a wee bit of detail on the work of the Commissioning Board and where some of that investment that I mentioned has been made. And you'll note just at the top of that table on paragraph 4, page 53 of the papers, Quite a lot of that investment has been about creating capacity just to drive this change and create the headspace to allow us to take that forward. There's been a number of time-limited roles created, just about driving forward some of those specific project-based activities. That's worked really well for us. We've seen that in the early days of the Commissioning Board, that did a really good outcome for us, and we've continued to support that as people have brought new ideas and initiatives forward to us. I think we threw too much of the background information. It's there for information within the report, but I wanted just to focus on a few of the examples that we've picked out within the body of the report here, just to give you a flavour of some of the activities that the Commissioning Board have been focused on and that we have provided funding just to drive forward, if that's okay. The first one is at paragraph 9 of the report, which talks about supported accommodation and the review of 24-hour care. So I think what I would say is that this highlights some of the real opportunities for shared supports, how we can do things really differently, how we can use technology-enabled supports to really change the models of care and how we take things forward in a slightly different way. This just initially was based on a change to how people were paid. Ultimately, I suppose that's what drove a lot of the work here, was that the people who worked through the night, in terms of the sleepover and wake and night shift services, we had to introduce a different pay model for them, which all of a sudden became financially unsustainable for us, and we had to look at a different way of doing that. At the time when we started to look at it, was 143 people in receipt of overnight supports, which included sleepovers and waking night shifts. And through the work of the team that's put together here, we work really closely with individuals and families to allow them to live more independently. Packages of care have been reduced in most cases, but it's safe to do so. Additional assistance has been put in place through a mix of responder services, so rather than having dedicated supports, created responder hubs, which allow people to be reacted to as required, but in a much more cost-effective manner. The accommodation tenancies were put in place, working really closely with our colleagues from housing round about some of those new models of accommodation, and technology-enabled care packages put in place as well, just to underpin all of this. Feedback from individuals and their families has been incredibly positive. The work of this that started off within the Commissioning Board has now been mainstreamed. It's actually now just been taken forward as part of day-to-day business. The initial savings that managed to realise from the work here were in the region of £460,000 or thereabouts. As I say, because of that, we took the opportunity to mainstream the work, create the team on a substantive basis, and allow this work really to be taken forward all the time. The next area just to have a quick look at was around about our transformation programme communications, as it's badged there, paragraph 12. And this is just, we always talk about communications being a key part of everything that we do, and that's absolutely true within the transformation work, within the partnership as well, within the IGIB. To achieve that significant and lasting culture change that we're all aspiring to, communication sits right at the very heart of it all. To allow us to take that forward in the short term, we put in place a communications programme officer, funded through the Commissioning Board. And again, some of the narrative here just reflects on the work that post took forward, some of the real opportunities that were driven forward through that person. And again, because of those successes, we took the opportunity through our budget process last year to create that post on a substantive basis. So it's no longer funded out of the Commissioning Board as part of the core budget now, just recognising the real opportunities that it did offer to us. Work really closely between this communications person and the council comms team, and also the NHS comms team, just to make sure that all of those various activities and events around about local conversations, the engagement events, Caring for Ayrshire programme, the stakeholder forum, suicide awareness, child poverty challenge. Next week we've got the poverty week as well. Lots of that stuff is really integral to the work that we do, that the council does and the NHS do. So it's really important that the teams work together, and they do that. Another big part of the work that that person, the original post, started to take forward, and now the substantive post holder is absolutely driving forward, is round about having a bespoke website for the Health and Social Care Partnership. I think at this point in time and up to now, we've both kind of used both the NHS and the council websites to share our information on it, which has worked well for us. But I think that's an opportunity now to take that to the next level. And rather than being a health and social care website where people is very much about the organisation, we're trying to take the opportunity to make it about it's almost a wellbeing website, talking about living well, less about the organisation and much more about what we do and what people want to see and the services that they wish to access. That works progressively well, as I said, and it's hopeful that the new website should go live within the next month or so, very much based around the strategic plans, big objectives in there, encapsulated around about the strapline people, compassion and partnership. The next area we've got within the report here is around about ageing adaptations. And I know this is an area that we do report frequently through a range of different places within East Ayrshire Performs as much as anything else as well, in terms of the spend around about ageing adaptations. There was a significant focus on this, as you can imagine, during the pandemic. The Commissioning Board back in December 2020 received an update just in relation to occupational therapy and how ageing adaptations has been impacted by some of the challenges in there. A piece of work was progressed, proposed and subsequently progressed around about how we could start to reduce some of those waiting times and change the way that we deliver those services. We're trying to capture just at paragraph 18 some of the very quick results that we've seen on the back of that, which was within the North team, a reduction of 80 people waiting to be assessed, and the longest wait time again reduced by 13 weeks. Within the South, a reduction of 108 people awaiting assessment, and the longest wait time reducing down by 31 weeks. Moving and handling training was identified as quite a concern for us. It probably still is, to be fair. And to address that, what we did was put in place an extra 2.5 occupational therapists and a team manager with some technician and assistant supports, just round about taking all of that work forward, but also making sure that moving and handling training could absolutely be handled as part of that big piece of work. Finally, then here's just round about best value service reviews, and as I touched on at the start, clearly the programme for best value service reviews was impacted during the last year or so as a consequence of the pandemic. However, there were still some really good progress reports received by the board. A few bullet points at paragraph 22 just highlighting some of the various bits of work and the different stages that have reached within that. We also took the opportunity, as you'd expect, just to reflect on the timescales that we set and recalibrate that, just to make sure that we're doing things in a really structured and considered manner, just to take account of COVID and make sure that we weren't doing anything that would jeopardise the actual service delivery and the emergency response at that point in time. So a number of the year 2, year 3 best value service review projects were rephased within that. They're still being taken forward, but just a different timeline. The final main part within the report here I wanted to touch on was just in relation to one of those best value service reviews, and that was in relation to care at home. It was just to give a bit of detail around about that, to show that the type of analysis and the type of detail that each of these best value reviews does go into. So the care at home review, as we've summarised at paragraph 28, evaluated the current delivery of services and identified a number of areas for improvement, round about how the roles could be better defined to support efficiencies, how multidisciplinary teams could work better in relation to enablement, and also how can staff participate better, within those multidisciplinary teams. Round about recruitment and retention of our staff groups, which has been a challenge, and we are seeing now, even now, in the depths of where we are at this point in time, and this is right across the country. Care at home staffing is a real challenge for every area of Scotland at this point in time. Other opportunities for improvement round about consistency and flexibility of care, round about what we can do in relation to bed days lost to delayed discharges. Ailey's already touched on that this morning. There's one of the audit reports of last year as well. Understanding capacity and demand, and importantly, how can we make better use of technology and systems to really support the work that our teams do. That piece of work was taken forward. There was a programme of improvement activities put in place at the end of it. The report here gives a bit of details, I say, around about the options appraisal process, which I won't talk through, but I'm happy to take any questions on. But maybe importantly, the outcomes from that was a really structured improvement plan about how we make the changes in there. That remains a really challenging area for us at this time, as I've reflected on a couple of times throughout the presentation here, just in terms of the opportunities to do what we want to do, which was essentially to bring a lot of the externally provided home care, bring it back in-house again. But given where we are and the pressures on the system, it was really important that we don't destabilise that part of the market at this point in time. So on the back of that, there was a delay built into the implementation of the action plan, which I've seen that transfer of care from external to in-house to commence next month, tomorrow essentially. That's likely to be delayed a wee bit further, just given where we are round about care at home at this point in time. That's not a bad thing. I think it's absolutely planned and necessary, just to make sure that when we do make that transition, it's as seamless as possible for our service users and they don't jeopardise service delivery at all in any shape or form. I hope that's been helpful and informative for members of the committee, and as I've said a few times, I'm happy to take any questions on any of the areas I've spoken about, or indeed anything else within the report. Thanks very much.
Thanks, Craig. could maybe ask a question, paragraph 18, where you're talking about the aids and adaptations. These figures are now almost a year old. Can I ask, I don't expect you to have the figures, but is the general trend still to reduce waiting times from October 20 up until today's date?
I can certainly get the figures for you, Councillor Mayor, but yeah, I think that the general trend has. So these were very quick improvements that we've seen, and yes, I think that the general trend has been that once the improvements been made and we've seen the waiting times reduce, the things get back onto an even keel, that has been maintained. Clearly, at various stages within the pandemic, where we have staff absence, for example, around about occupational therapists, that does have an impact. But I think the work we've done has seen a significant improvement, and it has been sustained. But I can get the up-to-date figures if that's something you're interested in seeing.
That's fine, thank you. Members, anyone else? Questions for Craig? Councillor Todd.
Thanks very much, Convener. Craig, well done with all the work that you've done, you and your team, bringing things into play as regards the home care service. I think that's the right direction with the training and the qualifications that we are providing for our staff. I think we're going to have a really professional workforce in that area in the future. And on that note, notwithstanding the excellent work that you and the team and social work at East Ayrshire have done with the failure of private residential home, are there any pressures that you envisage in the future for other private residential providers? And do we need to have our eyes on the ball for that? Thank you.
Through you, Chair. Thank you for those comments, Councillor Todd. Maybe just picking up the part about training, which I didn't mention in the report. That was a big recommendation, a big part that has been taken forward as a consequence of the best value review. I was talking to Dale yesterday, one of my colleagues. She was saying that we've just this week there's 3 new people started within the learning and development team around about the development of what we're classing as our a sort of training academy, for want of a better word. This is how we actually sort of bring a lot of this in-house and we make it a really professional service that we can continue to take and drive forward. So there's 3 new people started in that role just over the last week or so. So it's a really exciting time for that part of the business and how we can really support our own staff going forward. So thank you for recognising that. In terms of the care home sector, which is something we don't clearly provide ourselves, so we do care at home, but we don't do the residential care homes. You're right, there has been some real challenges over the last number of years, to be fair, in particular areas, and we've seen a number of care home providers fail, and at times we need to step in to provide support around about it. I think what we have seen over the last year or 18 months during the pandemic is that the pressure on the care home sector has been incredible. It's been probably a time like no other. That remains extremely challenging for a number of our care homes. We see on a regular basis that care homes do still have outbreaks of COVID within them, and they require some support just to help them through that particular time. To do that, we've put in place something called a care home oversight group, CHOG. It currently meets twice a week, and it's got representation from all across our different providers, from primary care, from Eric's side, from Marion's side, etc., but right across all the work that we do. But importantly, it's got all the representatives from the care homes there as well. They see that as a really valuable support to them, and it allows us to keep a really close oversight of what they're doing. And if there is any sense that they're likely to get into difficulties, we identify it really quickly, and we can wrap that support around them really quickly as well to try and provide whatever we can. Because at the end of the day, these are our residents that are in these places, and we need to make sure we do the absolute best by them. So yes, there's a range of measures in place already, just to give us that early warning system, I guess. But also to make sure we can put support in really quickly. We don't want to see any of these organisations fail. We want to do everything we can to support them, and we do that. I've seen a number of, not a big number, but a small number of organisations who have got into a bit of difficulty in the last year or so, and we've been able to put in some nursing support, some social work support, some social care support, just to help them through what was a difficult time, and it has proved to be really effective. So that will continue certainly for the foreseeable future.
Thanks, Craig. Anyone else? Councillor Grant, Ian.
Hi, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Craig, as expected, you've talked about all the efforts of your staff, all the good systems that have been put in place, and all the tremendous work that has gone on in the last year to reach the point that we're at. I'd just like to take a moment to thank you personally for the leadership that you've shown in a very difficult time. It doesn't surprise me that you're the first person to talk about others and the work they put in, but it falls to us in this committee to recognise what you've done. So on behalf of us all, thank you very much.
Thanks, Ian. If there are no other points, members can I refer you to the recommendations at paragraph 2 on page 52. So we agree the recommendations. Thank you. We can now move on. Excuse me. Sorry about that. Can we now move on to item 6 on the agenda, which is the sorry, no, we're going on to 7, out with placements, and that's by Charles Rock. Thank you.
Good morning, Chair. Good morning, members. Thank you for the invite today to profile the work that's been undertaken by the Out with Placement Screening Group over the last financial year. My name's Charles Rock. I'm Senior Manager within the Health and Social Care Partnership, but I'm also Chair of the OPSG Group, which is a multi-agency representation group that sits with governance oversight for all our most vulnerable and valuable children and young people who require the resource investment, both in preventative care support, but also in addition to their care needs and complex needs that require an external residential or education resource within that. I hope to talk to you today about the amazing work that has been undertaken by OPSG in addition to the multi-agency professionals caring and supporting for our children and young people, but also the challenges COVID on the plans for children. The OPSG continues to have a philosophy and commitment that aligns with the Council's commitment to both the corporate and community parent role. We have a philosophy in addition to that around best value for our most valuable children, but also best value for the Council and the Health and Social Care Partnership to ensure we absolutely get the best value for children in the care that are being provided. We know the challenges that have impacted on all children and adult services over the last period of time. And at times I need to be reminded of the impact of 2 national lockdowns on children's well-being at particular points around the level of emotional anxiety and distress that's placed on their plans, particularly around complex need, which impacted on the capacity for lead professional provision within social work and health to continue to care and support children within our communities. There was an amazing amount of work that was undertaken despite all these challenges, particularly with both national lockdowns having no visibility of children at different points through our colleagues in education. And we continue to support children using unique and creative ways to try and meet a lot of the complex need that was in place. Within the report itself, I'll kind of highlight the overview of the placements throughout 2020 and 21. You'll see that gives a range of the different investments that the OPSG provides to children and young people through classroom support, preventative support, day education resource, residential care, secure care and respite and short break. The significant investment that OPSG provide is around residential care and out with placements. And this is where we have a range of complex needs for children that, despite the very complex and creative plans that are put in place, children and young people are required to be cared for within an additional resource that is bespoke to their unique needs at different stages. Now that comes with a huge significant cost for OPSG, and the cost of these placements can range at different points between £180,000 per year to upwards of £300,000 per year, depending on the additional placement agreements that are required to meet that need. You'll see the trends within that, particularly around residential care. Despite all the challenges of last year, we continued a consistent trend from the previous year, and it is still our commitment through the trends is to try and get into a more preventative early help and support investment within these plans, and to reduce the overall residential care requirement for children and young people. That's very much aligned to the philosophy and the principles of the promise, and our implementation of the promise through both the Health and Social Care Partnership and the Council, but to the wider community supports that are in place. You'll see that there has been an increase in preventative support and day placements within education, but I need to note there is still a huge amount of work that has been undertaken by my colleagues in Education Services to try and get a good understanding of these plans and to consider where children are required to be educated out with, that we look at every attempt to try and support them through our specialist additional needs supports, either within primary provision or within secondary education. Need to kind of profile that there is additional specialist education resources that have been developed within both East Ayrshire, but also agreements and terms of understanding that's taking place with our colleagues both in North and South Ayrshire. It's important to note that education have been investing via the Scottish Attainment Education Challenge Fund in the Inclusion Hub provision, which is now in place for 4 of our secondary schools. And the aim of that is to prevent need for educational placements for secondary school pupils out with East Ayrshire, and to try and meet a greater moral and ethical responsibility to ensure that children are educated within East Ayrshire itself. I'll note the future challenges and opportunities for us, and some of these are on a consistent trend every year. This places huge pressures on financial resources because there is an unpredictable element to the need to require to go for an out with placement. The absolute cost of residential placements continues to place significant resource pressures, and I'll come on to the Scottish Excel framework and highlight the challenges and future challenges that will take place within 2022. There is the right for children and young people for continuing care, which traditionally and historically we had children who came to the age of 16, 17 and moved on to a community resource, either through Blue Triangle or through a bespoke community plan around their own tenancy that we supported. However, there is the right for continuing care, which we are negotiating with external residential agencies around what the costs would be, very much considering that the care costs would be of a lesser amount. Unfortunately, at this stage, most of the external providers are still of the view that any young person over the age of 18 with the right for continuing care will be required to pay at the full cost of care for a child under the age of 16. This is something that has been highlighted to Scottish Government and through the Excel framework, but is very much in a competitive model for external resources, requiring to ensure that their funding resources are in place. We have challenges around foster care availability. This is a huge challenge around building the enhancement of our internal resources within our local areas. This has been particularly challenging over the last 12 months, given the historical ways that we would recruit foster carers, sometimes within community arenas and environments, or community fairs, or within Kilmarnock Football Club, trying to enhance kind of large crowds to attract interest in becoming a foster care. So that's been hugely challenging. This is part of a recovery model going into 2022 to look at different creative ways that we can continue that adaptability. Our East Ayrshire children's houses have done extremely well through the last 12 months, 18 months, but we know that we have had challenges for our most valuable children being cared for within this resource, the impact of the national lockdowns, both on their education, but on the range of community supports that would be in place, that would ordinarily and historically support this complex need. That has placed additional pressures that has resulted in some of our children and young people having to be placed externally. There are still huge uncertainties around the impact of COVID on children's well-being, and we have identified what we have referred to as delayed demand, which is the uncertain impact of COVID around 2 national lockdowns and the ability of children's services through the named person services to be able to identify what some of that need would be. This is uncertain for us both locally and nationally, and we recognise that despite there being child protection activity, counterintuitively the national trend is child protection data has decreased through 2021-22, which does give credence to that theory of delayed demand, which may impact on 2022. All efforts are being continued to be made through with Placement Screening Group through the Multi-Agency Forum to provide best value. This is a highly credible expertise group that provides good oversight. Members will be cited to the internal audit review last year, which highlighted the strength of the group to provide a level of critical analysis around both the placement agreements, but also around the cost factors and procurement contracts that we have around commissioning with placements. Just to highlight to members that a real opportunity is the alignment of the Children's Services Wellbeing Model, which has progressed through the East Ayrshire Children and Young People Strategic Partnership. And this is about our commitment to provide a real fundamental change to early help and support, very much looking at a community model through our virtual multidisciplinary teams, which will be aligned to our community clusters as part of that transformational design of services. The part of the implementation of that will be looking at how we best utilise resources, and there is a key role with OPSG within that, particularly about our commitment to bring savings within that resources and how we could perhaps disinvest from a quite resource heavy alignment external resources to the resources or children's services that were required within East Ayrshire, and how we would do that through the Strategic Commissioning Board and some of that creative thinking around spend to save within that. I spoke a bit earlier on about the Excel, Scottish Excel and framework providers, and that's just to profile that Scotland Excel is an organisation commissioned by Scottish Government to oversee all public contracts on behalf of the 32 local authorities. They're responsible for monitoring and negotiating around the tendering of contracts and the screening of uplifts required for the negotiation of terms within placement agreements. This has always given us a level of reassurance, stability, predictability in terms of placement costs, and for the most part OPSG has always tried to ensure that we have used external placements within the Excel and Excel framework. Only unique situations, which is around really complex needs for children, that we have went out with the Excel framework, but we've been very successful within our contracts and commissioning team and through our colleagues in finance to ensure that the negotiation of such contracts is kept consistent. However, the current framework is due to expire in March 2022, and any applications out with that will have to be considered on a unique each individual scenario and it will have to be negotiated as such. That does bring a level of unpredictability. However, we hope that there will be future consideration be given to create a sort of consistency. There is a clear leadership approach that COSLA and Scottish Government are requiring in this, and members will note that this is one of the areas that is being considered as part of the National Care Service consultation about a national and continuing national approach to ensure that local areas have both best value around the resource, but also how our most valuable children and young people continue to have best value within that as well. To come on to the financial oversight for OPSG, members will note within the paper that we had a total spend for 2021 of 5.28 million. That was an increase of 432,000 from the previous year. We were able, through good oversight and analysis from the group, in addition in partnership with our colleagues in finance, was to be able to identify 532,000 of that amount to be claimed against the Scottish Government COVID recovery, which brought in an underspend of just over 100,000. Positively, which is a continuing trend for us, our secure budget continues to be underspent by 345,000, and that's continuing around zero placements being required. And that's been a huge cultural and philosophical shift for us to ensure that we continue to manage the risk and vulnerability for children within communities, and very much of the view that the requirement and threshold around needing to secure, taking a very much right-based approach for children, is in very unique and exceptional circumstances. Currently, we are sitting at a projection overspend for this financial year of 319,000. At this stage, that is a projection. We have identified a number of young people that will be moving on to community supports or through our internal care provision through this financial year. However, we do highlight that there is still an unpredictable element to the assessment and planning of children through COVID recovery, and there will continue to be challenges for OPSG to ensure that this is brought within line. COVID will continue to present that, and children's services thankfully are back in mostly recovery in regards to where it was pre-pandemic, and the level of contact that they are having with children has been increasing. However, this will continue to be closely monitored by the OPSG group throughout the next period of time. I hope that's been a helpful update for members for the Governance and Scrutiny Committee, and I'm happy to take any questions or points or any points for clarification. Thank you.
Thanks, Charles, for that comprehensive report. It must be very, very difficult job that you do, trying to balance the needs of the individual child against the needs of the school, for example, and at the same time keep an eye on the cash register at the end of the day. I think we should all appreciate the good job that you're doing. Well, one or two members want to come in. Councillor Grant first. Ian?
Yeah, thanks. Thanks, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Charles, for all the excellent work that you and your team do. I've listened to your reports on many occasions now, and it strikes me that the biggest challenge in some cases is really the unpredictability. You know, you don't have a magic wand or a crystal ball to see what's going to happen next, and that obviously has an immediate impact on the finances of your part of the organisation. You can have a smooth run, or it can be an extremely bumpy road. I was wondering, just an opinion, would a substantial funding increase, a substantial investment in what you do, perhaps in areas such as infrastructure and staff and training, but I'm thinking more in terms of, you know, location than anything else, maybe a large centre of some sort. Would that give you the opportunity to smooth out some of those bumps in the road going forward? You know, would it be a good thing if, instead of us sending people elsewhere, if we had the facility that others could come to us? You know, I'm just trying to think strategically if it would be a better thing for us to invest early in a big way and have, you know, less shocks as we go down the line. Wonder what your thoughts about that would be, Charles.
Councillor Grant, thank you, and thank you for the kind words in regards to the work that you know, not only for OPSG but really for the professionals and practitioners who are supporting children in communities, because there's been a huge amount of work in that area in the last year, and people really committed. It's an interesting point, and we do have our own internal resources. For example, we have 3 children's houses within East Ayrshire. We also have a capacity of amazing foster carers who do a huge amount of work for children. You know, the trajectory and the philosophy of both the Children's Healthcare and Justice, the Health and Social Care Partnership, the Council is about trying to really embrace the principles of the promise and try and fundamentally shift how we support children within their families and communities themselves, and try and look at these resources as an assets themselves. I've always felt that the approach that we do need to take is a whole systems approach, and that whole systems approach really needs to be thought from an investment at the early stages of children's lives. You know, we really need to think about that second and third horizon planning. We really need to get ahead, and that sort of wrap around whole systems approach around, particularly around for the named person in health services, for children's plans at the earliest point, at the point of antenatal, at the point a child and our vulnerable parents are going home from hospital, and all the challenges around the impact of poverty that takes place that brings these additional pressures. And this is where the transformational design of the wellbeing model sitting within our community model, because we're really trying to shift this. Absolutely, if there is additional resources that can be identified both locally or nationally to invest in that, it will give us the best opportunity to create that second and third horizon planning, and really will create legacy for children and young people in years to come, that we will get the best wraparound support around the early signs of neglect that will actually limit the impact at later life. The challenges for the children's services at different stages is, yeah, we could have a centralised point, a focal point, or additional children's house, but really we would go against the principles of both us as a partnership and council, but also the national policy around the promise, which we need to, you know, increase our threshold of managing risk within the communities themselves. If I think we go back years, you think about our bairns, you know, we need to have our bairns in our community. And I think we've been very much welcomed the commitment from members here, but the council as a whole, to really shift that. So, but thanks very much for that point, Councillor Grant. Thank you.
Thanks for that. Councillor Mackay, Maureen, you want in?
Sorry about that. Yes, please. Thank you very much, Charles. Charles, I would just like to, just before I ask my question, please, on page 70 at paragraph 44, I would just like to commend the proposal made there to, if there are any additional services, for that to be reinvested in support accommodation for care leavers. That's certainly something that I would very much welcome, and I think is a very good proposal, and is again part of the philosophy that we have, which is about seeing what our ongoing commitment to young people that have come through looked after care within East Ayrshire. So that's certainly something very positive. So on that basis, and against the backdrop of COVID, and in particular looking now as the reports that we're getting through that people who are unwell, who are being admitted to hospital at the moment and who unfortunately are ending up still in intensive care, are tending to be people who are young now and people who are being unvaccinated. So I'm really interested in knowing what the approaches are that we are taking in East Ayrshire to the vaccination of young people who are our looked after young people. If you could just give us some comments around that, Charles, that would be a help, please.
Councillor Mackay, thank you, and thank you for the compliments around the report. This has been a really tricky ethical and moral dilemma for services and some of our children and young people who are within our care. We have the statutory parental rights for these children and young people, and very much we would have a sort of moral and parental responsibility to have discussions with these children and young people around the benefits of the vaccine, and we clearly promote that. However, the consent for children and young people over the age of 12 ultimately lies with them and themselves, and this is about an individual choice around their rights to make that decision. We very much will promote that with the relationships we have around the benefits of the vaccine, particularly around for their health and well-being, but for the health and well-being around the team that will be caring for them. However, there is a number of our children and young people who we do not have the formal legal parental rights, and the parental rights still sit with parents, and we are having discussions with parents around that, and again it still comes down to a consent issue for individual children and young people at that stage. We will very much take the position, we will promote that and give the children and young people all information they require for them to make the best choices that they can make.
Thank you very much, Charles. That's helpful, and that's really just confirming what I expected the position would be. What I'm interested in, though, it would be a sense of, if you have such a thing or you can get us such a thing, is the percentages of our young people that are actually in the situation where we are having young people who are choosing to be vaccinated, and we have that parental acceptance, as opposed to numbers where that's not the position that we're actually in, because that's really what we need to give us a sense of, is this a live issue for us, or is this not something to be as concerned about?
Councillor Mackay, I don't have that information or detail, but if there is an interest from members of this group, then I can have discussions with my colleague Claire Wilson, who has the oversight of the corporate community parenting role, to consider that information and see how valuable it would be. Particularly quite tricky at different points to capture that, but it's something that we can explore.
Thank you very much, and thank you, Councillor Mayor.
Sally, Councillor Cogley, you wanted in?
Yes, thank you very much, Chair. Good morning, Charles. Thank you very much for the report and for the hard work that your team does. I wish to add my thanks to the others that have been expressed. And it's nice to meet you at last, albeit through a screen. You'll be aware one of the things that I've raised in relation to young people is the waiting time for CALMS assessments, and then any other follow-on assessments that might be required. And this is something that I've discussed with other members of the Health and Social Care Partnership. How does this impact very specifically towards the young people that you are trying to help? I'm hoping that they queue jump. I guess I'm looking for want of a better word, because I know the waiting times are very, very challenging. Thank you.
Councillor Cogley, thank you. Thank you again for the kind compliments. This is a complex area around the level of distress our children and young people experience. We know that the adversarial events that are mapped out in most of our children's lives that impact on their outcomes. we know that for a huge number of our children and young people, there is a level of almost post-traumatic stress and post-traumatic trauma experience from the level of neglect or abuse they may have experienced at different points. We have a good partnership approach with our colleagues in CAMHS. They are now, in the last 9 months, now a member of our OPSG. Historically, they have not been sitting within this group, and actually this has done a huge amount to profile the experiences of our children and young people, not only from an early help and support agenda, but also about children who are in our care and out with placement, about the interface and partnership working that we have with CAMHS to undertake really complex work to support children and young people back to East Ayrshire. To be fair for CAMHS, this is a wider wellbeing agenda, and actually there's a huge amount of pressure within that service. It's been well profiled. The waiting lists that are identified for them to access that service, and from their own analysis is unacceptable in regards to the impact that's having. What we'd highlight is from two parts is the work that CAMHS are doing to undertake, particularly in East Ayrshire, to try and find a resolution to a better responsive service to complex need is underway, but also profiling the work around the mental health agenda that's been undertaken by health services and in partnership with education and social work, and that's been part of the wellbeing model. So there is additional supports around school counselling and through an infrastructure around wellbeing within children's secondary schools that is beginning to try and find early help and support. So, what's been done around the analysis is that there's a huge amount of inappropriate ask or referrals to CAMHS that places huge amounts of pressures on them, traditionally speaking, either through GP or through the children's services, either because there's a huge amount of pressure from communities or parents around that need, and the amount of work that goes into CAMHS to try and triage at different points takes them away from actually that targeted support around real complex need. And I think that's, Councillor Cawley, where you have picked up, because I know we've had communication in this in the past, where you have picked up that frustration around complex need that is not getting that support in place. There is also additional funding that we put in place, albeit this is about a non-recurrent investment around commissioning through a colleague's partnership with Children's First that is looking at enhanced support around that, because this is going to be a continuing theme around emotional distress. We've seen a huge increase in eating disorders in Ayrshire. It's almost doubled through the last year, which is having another significant impact on our CAMHS service. So I'm very optimistic through our colleagues in CAMHS now sitting in OPSG is that we will see a better response or profile in that need for our children out with that know that we require to put in place a very bespoke plan for them to return to our communities. Hopefully that's helpful.
Yeah, thank you very much, Charles, for that response. And interestingly, I had a conversation with Linda McCauley-Griffiths earlier this week, and about the CAMHS, etc. referrals. And I'm aware that education are putting a number of measures into place, so it could well be worth your while. I'm sure you probably already are, but I'm sure it would be worth your while cross-referencing so that there isn't any duplication of the work that's being done within education. I think they feel like you that the CAMHS referrals need a far greater triage system I guess to direct those that don't specifically need a psychiatric type assessment then as a follow-on through the more appropriate routes. So that's one point. Secondly, just to say that there is going to be a presentation to all elected members later in November about the CAMHS referrals and what we're doing and what direction that's going in, because I think it's information that we as elected members need to know quite a bit more about. But thank you very much for your reply. Thank you, Charles.
Thank you, members. If there are no more questions, no more points to make, can I refer you to the recommendations on page 62? And can we agree the recommendations? Everyone quite happy? Thank you for that. We can now move on to the next item on the agenda, item 8, the annual assurance statement. And this has been taken by Helen Merriman from the Housing Department. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Good morning, members and colleagues. The purpose of this report is to seek approval to submit the annual assurance statement for 2021 to the Scottish Housing Regulator and to seek agreement of the annual assurance statement improvement action plan. I'll refer to the Scottish Housing Regulator as the regulator from now on. The recommendations are noted at paragraph 2 of the report. To provide you with some background, in February 2019, the regulator published its revised regulatory framework, Regulation of Social Housing in Scotland, and this sets out the requirements which must be met by all social landlords in Scotland. For local authorities, the requirements cover the 5 broad areas stated within paragraph 3. And central to the framework is that landlords assure themselves, their tenants, and the regulator that they comply with all the regulatory requirements. Paragraphs 5 through to 8 describe the timescale for submission of the annual assurance statement, landlords' compliance with all of the relevant requirements within the framework, and what action is required where a landlord does not fully comply. It also contains detail of the format of the statement and its publication. The Council's proposed annual assurance statement for 2021 is available at Appendix 3 to this report. Duplication of text in the second last paragraph of the statement has been noted and amended accordingly. Paragraphs 9 and 10 describe how a landlord gains assurance on its compliance with the requirements. In order to gain assurance on compliance, a self-assessment matrix has been developed, which can be seen at Appendix 1. And this sets out each of the relevant requirements and the associated evidence used to gain assurance on compliance. Paragraphs 11 through to 16 describe non-compliance and what a landlord should do when it identifies areas for improvement and how appropriate actions should be agreed to address these areas. There are a number of areas which local authorities must consider, and paragraph 12 provides succinct reasons to determine non-compliance. This section also provides guidance on non-compliance and engagement with the regulator, and that the regulator may reach a different view on whether an issue is material if they're engaging with a landlord at a later date, and that this is a matter of judgment. A progress update on the Council's annual assurance statement action plan for 2021-22 can be found at Appendix 2 to this report. Paragraphs 17 through to 25 state the temporary changes to the regulator's approach in response to COVID-19, noting the challenges currently faced by social landlords, prioritisation of operations to mitigate and minimise the impact of the pandemic upon our tenants, people who experience homelessness and other service users, while simultaneously protecting the health and safety of staff and contractors. In response to the pandemic, the regulator made some temporary changes to its approach. These changes include an extension to the submission deadline for last year's statement. The regulator published advisory guidance to assist landlords to adapt their approach to the submission of the statement, taking cognizance of the pandemic. This guidance remains relevant and has been used in conjunction with the framework in preparing this year's statement. Emphasis is placed on landlords understanding the extent to which they're able to deliver services and how compliance with the requirements has been affected by COVID-19. The full range of new risks and issues for tenants and other service users must be identified by landlords as a result of the pandemic, and the work undertaken to produce this year's statement, and evidence compliance with the requirements will be an integral part of recovery and renewal planning for housing and communities moving forward. Any instances whereby non-compliance with the requirements is a direct result of COVID-19, these should be distinguished in the statement from any other areas of non-compliance. Guidance from the regulator was anticipated to be published in relation to equalities data collection in advance of preparing this year's statement, However, the regulator wrote to all landlords in June this year to advise that the impact of COVID-19 has slowed the production of the guidance to support landlords in their work to comply with equalities and human rights requirements. The regulator will therefore not measure compliance with this requirement this year and have asked landlords to provide assurance in their statement that they have appropriate plans to implement an effective approach to the collection of the equalities information and have started to consider how they can adopt a human rights approach in their work. Further to this correspondence, in August 2021, the regulator has since published guidance collecting equality information, national guidance for Scottish social landlords. It is anticipated that the regulator, in partnership with the Scottish Human Rights Commission, will publish a briefing on the right to housing in the coming months to support landlords in this area. The Council is progressing work to ensure that this data is collected and will incorporate the regulator's guidance to ensure compliance with this requirement for the submission of next year's statement, and compliance will be measured as confirmed in our annual assurance statement. Members, you will note that the context in which this year's statement has been produced is not one that could have been anticipated, and the impact of COVID-19 has presented challenges. Despite this, the Council has proactively maintained contact with the regulator since the start of the pandemic to ensure a positive relationship has continued, and we have received ongoing support via our regulation lead. Within policy and community planning implications, the Council's annual assurance statement provides assurance to us as a landlord, tenants and other service users that we comply with the regulatory requirements and supports the vision and priorities within the East Ayrshire Community Plan 2015 to 2030 and associated delivery plans. Within legal and risk implications, should the Council fail to submit an annual assurance statement to the regulator by the 31st of October this year, it would be a breach of the requirements which are based on the statutory powers given to the regulator in the Housing Scotland Act 2010. There are no direct human resources, equality impact, financial or net zero implications arising from this report. Within transformation strategy implications, the Council's annual assurance statement evidences compliance with the requirements and demonstrates value to our tenants, people who are homeless and other service users. And to conclude, the submission of the Council's annual assurance statement to the regulator by the 31st of October this year will ensure compliance with its framework, with our assessment of compliance against the requirements forming an integral part of recovery and renewal work moving forward. Members, you will note the background papers listed at the end of the report. Thank you.
Thank you, Helen. Before I throw open, I'd just like to refer to page 82, the last item in Appendix 1, where it talks about the gathering of equalities data. Now, that's going to be rather difficult, I would imagine. Would you like to comment further on that? Or maybe Blair would like to come in, comment further on how we're going to do that exactly. Thank you.
I can certainly come in initially if Blair can come in afterwards. Thank you, Chair. We work obviously closely with the regulator, and you'll note within the report that we await guidance on how local authorities are going to gather the information that will meet the requirements and compliance. We do have measures in place through our existing systems to gather a wide variety of equalities information, but we'll certainly work with the regulator and make sure that our systems adhere to the compliance required.
Thanks. Blair, you want to add?
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, you're absolutely right. We're actually working really closely, and in fact, I've been asked to be part of a working group with the Scottish Housing Regulator to formalise the plans round about the capturing of equalities information. We've actually been aware of this for over a year now, Chair, and we've actually already put in some measures round about our applications for housing, and that will be enhancing the capture of equalities data through our homelessness presentations as well. So we're well informed, and we're probably in advance to the rest of Scotland, and we hope to keep it that way. Thank you, Chair.
Thanks for that, Blair. Members, any questions? Sally, I see you've got your hand up. you like to come in?
Yes, and Helen and Blair, thank you very much for the report and for the work. I guess where most of our landlords are concerned, most comply with most of the regulations, or if they're breaches, they might be small breaches or breaches that can be addressed relatively easily. From my side as an elected member, where I have more problems is where they're landlords who may just have one property and who actually don't care about that property at all. And Blair, I think you know I'm going to talk about one particular road in New Mills, which is within a conservation area, and it's a number of different properties, most of which are let by individual landlords. Most are in the most absolutely dreadful condition, which lets down the community, and they're not nice places for people to live in. Yet somehow there doesn't seem to be anything we can do about them, which for me as an elected member is very, very frustrating. For other people who live within the community, it's frustrating, and it can't be nice for the people who just accept that accommodation that is right at the bottom of the line is deemed to be acceptable. Sorry, but would you like to comment on that one, please? Thank you.
Yes, through you, Chair. Thanks, Councillor Cogley. The regulations are set out by the Scottish Housing Regulator are in regards to both local authorities and registered social landlords, and therefore private landlords are exempt from the criteria and the conditions set out with that. However, we have a range of legislation and statutory obligations as a local authority to be managing the private rented sector, and we continue to work specifically for that particular area, but across East Ayrshire, to ensure that we have full compliance and assurance over the landlords that are operating within our area. It's not without its challenges, I absolutely accept that, but we have again a range of measures. For example, I chair a scrutiny panel for landlords in East Ayrshire when we may have concerns, or concerns have been raised via tenants of landlords, to ensure that we use our full powers as a local authority to ensure that we're fully compliant. Thank you.
Thanks for that, Blair. Any more members? If not, can I refer you to the recommendations on paragraph 2 on page 72? Can we move the recommendations? Agreed? Thank you. We're now moving on to item 9, which is the East Ayrshire Performs. And I think Joe is going to start on this one. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. So, members, this is the first East Ayrshire Performs of this financial year. It was presented to Cabinet earlier on in September, and you know, the papers before you are many, but I suppose the story to tell this committee in terms of the East Ayrshire Performs in the Council is around COVID and COVID recovery that you'll see as we go through the report. Just to reiterate and reassure members that in terms of the budget that you set in March, that remains structurally sound, and as we go through the report, you'll hear more about the challenges facing not all services. It's different from last year, but there are some specific services that still see a substantial level of costs relating to COVID, as well as a substantial reduction in their income due to COVID. It's less than last year, but it still exists, and because of that, Cabinet earlier this month gave a draw from the COVID recovery funds that we hold as a council. So essentially, to start, members, our general fund unlimited balance, £9.5 million, is at 2.7%. It's a fair figure. I have to be honest with you, I would like it to be higher, but it's 9.7. It's £9.5 million, and it's a general fund unlimited balance that we hold, and we will hold that and use that wherever required. As part of this report as well, I give you assurance around the budget that was set and those savings options that were approved by full council. Those are reviewed constantly. Paragraph 8 of this report shows a couple very small amounts of money that are being impacted by COVID. Rest assured, members, that heads of service and budget holders will take all steps necessary to find alternative options for those in year, but we remain vigilant to these, particularly given the backdrop of COVID recovery. In terms of our services, education is looking to end the year with an overspend of around £700,000. It's due to additional transport costs from the decants for the new capital programme, but it's also because of additional transport costs for additional support needs. Now, because of that, the head of service is undertaking work, as you know, members, because of the budget last year, on the ASN sector that should be presented in the months ahead. In communities and economy, in the report before you, is in the new structure, members. This service that make up community and economy is projected to overspend by around £1.7 million. Now, all of that is due to COVID. And we can see at paragraph 10 that we have substantial costs and loss of income in facilities and property management, and substantial parking loss in Ayrshire Roads Alliance. And I'm pleased to say that the Cabinet earlier this month gave approval for a draw of £2 million to be made from that COVID recovery pot for these services as well as for education, to bring them back online and to give those heads of service some breathing space as they manoeuvre their way through this financial year and through the changing landscape of COVID recovery. In health and social care, well, I'm conscious that Charles touched on this, but you know, there's a story here. So I think the top line, the headline would be that health and social care is looking to end the year with an underspend of £750,000. That masks a whole lot of work. So essentially, our health and social care partnership has spent £4.4 million since March dealing with COVID. Now, uniquely, our partnership was allowed to submit a mobilisation plan, an invoice, if you will, that they can send to Scottish Government, recognising the unique spend that they make in achieving and delivering and spending on PPE, in supporting the private care home sector, as well as dealing with out-with placements and care at home. To date, they've spent 4.4. Through those mobilisation plans, through those bills, they've received around £3.1 million back, and they anticipate they'll get the additional top-up up to that £4.4 million back from Scottish Government. When you take that all into account, the service will underspend by £750,000, signalling again that structurally the budget is sound. Now, we anticipate that the Health and Social Care Partnership will continue to submit mobilisation plans, recognising the unique challenges that they face. I'm not saying that transport and parking and housing are different, but there's a raft of work taking place in the partnership. Paragraph 12 sets out that £14 million of COVID recovery money that we have. And as I said, Cabinet gave approval to allocate 1.973 of that to help those services run those services against COVID recovery, but to do so while not having to worry too much about their finances this year. Paragraph 14 picks up on developer contributions, and paragraph 15 on visions, and members gave approval for that spend of £212,000 to be used by the Leisure Trust for Alnwick Valley, and in terms of visions, that early repayment of grant to facilitate cash flow. It's the year end. We heard from our external auditors earlier, and so in terms of the external auditors for the Leisure Trust, East Ayrshire Leisure Trust, they asked for a letter of comfort, in the same way they did the previous year. Not to say that they have any concerns around the going concern status of the Leisure Trust, but the auditors, when they sign the accounts, as they'll do for us today, in signing it, they look forward a year ahead to anything that could crop up or impact on that. So in terms of the Leisure Trust, they're saying in that looking ahead, we still see COVID. We still see impact on your memberships and your income. So they've asked for a letter of comfort from the council. That has been issued. It has no bearing on any liability from the council, and it has also been green ticked by our external auditors in terms of our ability to issue that letter of comfort without impacting on our own financial standing. Paragraph 19 sets out the the contribution made from finance and ICT balances for the Remembrance Garden for Kilmarnock Football Club. And in terms of capital, people and health and safety, with your approval, Chair, I will deal with them in the next part of the report. What I would draw members' attention to, Chair, is paragraph 28 of the covering report. It notes that the constant work that the executive management team and the council management team do with regards to our corporate risk, that we have work ongoing on the risks arising from a loss of electricity at a national basis. It's known as Black Start. As you would imagine, quite a substantial risk, members and colleagues, and so colleagues across the council are looking to this risk. They are working on the factors that it would take to try and mitigate that. What it's flagged up here today for is to almost put it down as a marker that you're likely to see this transferred onto the corporate risk register in the next East Ayrshire performance report. So touching on that covering report at paragraph at page 93, we can see in terms of education that £673,000, a request for that COVID money, taking it down to £376,000 of an overspend, and Linda and colleagues will work to bring that down wherever possible. And in touching on page 94 in communities and economy, and you'll see across the board here that £1.7 million of an overspend, and the actions being taken by services to bring that back online. That request for the COVID funding was split into two parts, and it's shown at the foot of that table on page 94 of £589,000 needed immediately for costs that we know about, but a further £1.087 million which we've got approval for to allocate, but members gave that approval with officers still working to try and reduce that. So we've got approval to allocate 1.087. We'll do that later on in the year, recognising that colleagues continue to work on those impacts and those overspends. But in terms of the Ayrshire Roads Alliance, we are seeing that £706,000 over budget. We are seeing parking income being £575,000 of that, and that has now been allocated. And you can see that, you know, just in terms of that overspend of £706,000 or £700,000 in ARA, you know, that they're taking significant steps in there through utilising a whole range of actions to bring that down. And the same in facilities and property management, which is an income from a commercial lease that's challenging at this time. And you can see on page 95 on that table the allocation of the COVID recovery money to that service. And I suppose if we move on to page 97, members, and on to the housing revenue account, and the picture here is an underspend of £1.2 million, but again, similar to health and social care, it masks a whole range of issues. It's testimony to the work of colleagues in health and social care, and indeed in the housing revenue account, that they are holding and projecting underspends. But you can see here that the underspend in the housing revenue account has been achieved through reduced improvement works. So it's a good news story, but it's also a bad news story. Because we've not been able to do those works, we've not spent the money, but the works still need done. And so it adds that on to the timeline that Blair will need and Bob will need to get that done, recognising the challenges taking place, not only by COVID, but also by materials and availability as we go forward. And the table on page 98, members, is a table that attempts to tell a story in numeric form. I understand it beautifully, but I'm not sure others will. But it sets out that £14.25 million that we have for COVID recovery. Members kindly gave approval for £2 million to be drawn from that to assist services. We've got £12.2 million left, and a whole range of stuff, a whole range of actions to be undertaken by that colleagues and members are talking about in the days now and also in the days ahead. Chair, I'm happy to stop at the revenue section and take any questions that members may have.
Members, any questions for Joe so far? I'm not seeing any hands up, so we'll just carry on. Thanks, Joe.
Thank you, Chair and members. Take you to page 100 then on the report, which is the alternative delivery models. And so this report is a snapshot that gives up a financial details at a point in time. So we can see in terms of Ayrshire Roads Alliance an underspend overall of £256,000. But that was being achieved because the strategic delivery element was underspending by over £400,000. And local delivery east was overspending by £300,000. That's because, and it's again testimony to colleagues here, that they're showing an overspend of £300,000, but they've got a reduction in car parking income of just under £600,000. So they're finding other measures to offset that. And in South Ayrshire local delivery, we're seeing an underspend of 143, and that's because South Ayrshire Council have already previously given ARA the compensatory COVID recovery money for their parking income of just under £360,000. The capital is as listed, and it shows information on bridges and on the roads resurfacing and the bus station improvements, noting that the seating within the bus station has been changed to traditional seating, with colleagues in ARA retaining the perch style benches for use elsewhere. And touching on the East Ayrshire Leisure Trust trustees, the trust is projecting to overspend by just under £300,000. You know, we had this same position last year with the trust, and you know, Annika and her management team and all the staff in the trust did an incredible job to end the last year with an underspend. Today is the final day of the job retention, the furlough scheme. It was utilised by the Leisure Trust, and so in this figure, in this 293, although at this point it's an overspend, there are regular meetings taking place with Annika and her team, with myself and with Bob McCulloch, where we meet and support Annika and her team through their financial year. And I would anticipate, based on most recent discussions with the Trust, that we will see that overspend hopefully reduce as we go through later versions of East Ayrshire Performs. Chair, I'll continue with your approval to Treasury on page 103, and this shows the usual charts that highlight the debt and the investments. I'm very conscious, Chair, that immediately after this report I present the Treasury Management Report, so I don't intend to spend a great deal of time on Treasury other than in the subsequent report. I'm happy to stop there before we move on to Simon and to Capital, Chair, and take any questions.
Thanks, Joe. Members, with any questions for Joe? Not seeing anyone. Okay, we'll carry on now with the capital programme, and Simon, you're going to take us through this.
Yeah, thanks, Chair, and good morning, members. So the capital programme is continuing to make good progress. You can see that by the extent of green indicators within the main report. So I wouldn't intend to go through all the projects in great detail, but maybe if I could just provide you with an update on a selection just in relation to their stage of development. Projects that have recently been handed over include the speculative units at Moorfield, which were completed during August, and the central distribution kitchen in Kilmarnock, which was handed over on 23rd of September. Projects currently on site include refurbishment and extension to Crosshouse Primary and Communication Centre, which is progressing well, but it is facing some challenges around supply of materials due to the current market conditions. And we also have the new build Netherthird Primary School, where the contract's now been awarded and construction works commenced on the 6th of September. Projects due to start on site include a number of new build housing developments as part of the SHIP programme, and at Dunlop Early Childhood Centre, the Enabling Culvert Works contract is due to commence this week, with the actual early years new build anticipated to start in January of next year. Projects in development include the Doon Valley Community Campus, where a series of key stakeholder workshops are currently being undertaken. And we have the projects linked to the Ayrshire Growth Deal, including the core project, where stage 3 concept design proposals are being developed, and Moorfield phase 3, where further site investigation works are currently being undertaken. So that's just a quick overview of some of the key projects, Chair. I'm happy to answer any questions on these or indeed any other projects within the report. Thank you.
Members, I'm not seeing anyone. Quite happy to move on. Thank you. We're now on to the people section, and that'll be taken by Amanda Lowe. Thanks, Amanda.
Thanks, Chair. Over the summer period, members, we've been carrying out a review of the people pages and adding some additional details, so hopefully you'll find this helpful. People pages start on page 112. The first table shows the work days lost per employee. This is up 1.57 over the same period last year, but it has to be noted the same period last year was particularly low due to being in lockdown. Similarly, in the bottom of that page, it shows that all the periods of sickness have increased from last year, but again, due to the lockdown last year, the numbers were particularly low. Over the page 113 shows the range of welfare supports we have for employees. And occupational health appointments have increased slightly this period, but a slight drop in physio and counselling. We've moved now to a blended model of that, where everything had been getting done online, and now there's blended where necessary face-to-face appointments, so we're hoping to see an increase in the uptake. On page 114, halfway down, so workforce plan, key performance areas, noting that the headcount over the last quarter has increased by 99 employees. That is made up of an increase of 157 permanent employees and a decrease of 58 employees. When we compare the figures to last year, there is an increase of 595 employees, which is quite significant. However, I would note that we've changed the periods that we record in, and we've also included in that period of time the casual workers that were working in the quarter, which we previously didn't include, and that equates to 382 of the 595. Over the page, the full-time equivalents got a similar picture, an increase there of 450.28, and again 308.19 of those is made up of the casual workers. At the bottom of this page shows the development of our young workforce. Overall, the number of young people under 25 for the July reporting date was 355 with 60 apprentices. Just for members' information, the Apprenticeship Forum has now been put in place and all services are represented within that, and our trade union colleagues also joining in that to take forward further work in developing our young workforce. We have made over the summer further work in developing their career pathways through from foundation to graduate interns. And we've also developed a mentor and buddy up system to support the individuals and to support the managers. Over the page in 116, these are additional information that we didn't previously report on. So starting at the top, so recruitment vacancies, and then we've got the new employees to the council and the employees leaving the council, just for members' information. And over the page in 117, we've put some stats in from our organisational development section, and it's detailing the face and the coaching sessions and a few quotes from our employees. Happy to take any questions.
Thanks, Amanda. Members, don't see any hands. Oh, sorry, Councillor Cogley. Sally.
Yep. Thank you very much. Thank you, Amanda. Amanda, I'm interested in the figures of the numbers of temporary employees that we've got. And I wonder how long the people that are on temporary contracts, how long does the temporary contract last for? Is it an ongoing temporary contract, or is it effectively a rolling temporary contract? And is there a move to make those temporary contracts permanent? Please. Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor Cogley. There's a lot of work been going on with the temporary contracts, and they range from very short term sickness covers to maternity covers. Sometimes they're because it's temporary funding for the posts, so there's a wide range, short term to longer term. We do keep this very closely under review from the Workforce Review Group, which is myself, Joe, Katie and Craig MacArthur. And what we get is a quarterly report where we're reporting all the temporary employment, and we review as to whether or not they should be moved to permanent. I would say at this point there's quite a number are due to service redesigns ongoing. So until the services get the service redesigns through, and then I think we should see a significant reduction at that point. You can never get away with the temporary nature due to some of the funding and, as I say, sickness and things, but I can assure you we are keeping it under constant review, and we have got a drive to reduce that as far as we possibly can to move them to permanent.
Thanks, Amanda. Sally, you quite happy with that answer?
I think she's on mute.
Yeah, you're on mute, Sally.
Sorry about that. Yes, thank you very much for your answer. And just a follow-up question then, Amanda. In relation to the age profile of our workforce, are there any particular departments that we're concerned about that have, for example, an ageing workforce where we would be looking at wanting to recruit more younger people? Thank you.
Yep, we have that in a few areas, particularly care at home. And that's something that's been addressed through their best value service review for care at home, that we're looking at that about the functions that individuals undertake as well, because it's quite a hard job and for an ageing workforce, but we need to keep that, maintain that experience there. So we're looking at different ways of working and how we can, as East Ayrshire, but also nationally, how we can bring in younger people to social care services.
Thank you. And do those same principles apply to some of the outdoor jobs, so for example, outdoor amenities and roads?
Yes, we do have it in some areas, not just quite as predominant, but we do have it in other areas, and we keep that under review at all times of how we can support our workforce.
Thank you for that. If there's nothing else, members, we can move on to the health and safety section, and David Doran's going to take us through this. David.
Thanks, Chair, and good morning, members. If I could just begin with drawing members' attention to the top of page 119 of the summary report. We noted there that there were 613 non-reportable incidents reported to the health and safety section. That itself is an increase of 474 incidents when we compare it to the same period last year. As we've heard throughout the meeting today, that rise was heavily influenced by lockdown measures that were in place at the time. If we look at the reportable incidents, there were 7 reportable incidents over the periods, which is a decrease of 7 incidents in comparison to the same periods last year. But again, that decrease is heavily influenced by COVID. And the same periods last year, as an example, we had 10 incidents reported which were related to COVID-19 infections, which were believed to have taken place in the workplace. So again, there's a heavy influence there. But perhaps a better comparison, Chair, is if we go back to the same periods in 2019 when we didn't have that significant COVID impact there. And if we look at that, we had 539 non-reportable incidents and 8 reportable incidents. And if we use that comparator, what we'll see there is a slight increase in non-reportables and a slight decrease in reportable incidents. Within page 90 of the covering report, members should note that there have been 1,673 unannounced inspections recorded, and these inspections continue to support and promote a strong safety culture across all our high-risk activities like roads, construction projects and building refurbishment projects. As well as that, my team continues to undertake COVID safety inspections of all our buildings and depots, as we've done throughout this pandemic. Members will note on page 90 of the covering report, the HSEs carried out 2 separate visits to Western Road Depot with no further recommendations or actions required, and that provides us with reassurance that management arrangements in place remain robust. Just a short presentation there, Chair, and be happy to take any questions. Thanks.
Thanks, David. Just one from me, if you can refer to page 120, the number of violence and aggression incidents in education establishments. There seems to be a huge drop from 93 last period down to only 19. Is there any reason for that? Thank you.
Again, Chair, the numbers of violence and aggression incidents we see right across the board were heavily influenced by COVID and in schools being closed down and heavy restrictions across all sectors. As soon as these sectors opened up, we've seen violence and aggression incidents rising again. And as I've reported to previous cabinets and governance and scrutiny committees, Chair, many of these incidents are related to very, very challenging situations across some of the sectors that we have. And just for the information of members, Chair, I chair a violence and aggression focus group in education and continue to do so. We met last month and I've got another meeting coming up this month with them. And I've also set up a further focus group to look specifically at violence and aggression across telephone and also through internet, which we're starting to see coming through as well. So we are treating that very seriously, Chair.
Thank you. Members, any other questions? Don't see anyone. Okay, thank you, David. We are now moving on backwards, I would say, back to Joe for the business briefing.
Thank you. Page 122, and members, as you know, these are a range of indicators that budget holders, heads of service would feel are relevant to be presented to the committee today. Starting off in page 122 in economy and skills, a range of indicators there in the previous format. But I suppose the one for me in my role is about benefits processing, and that result of 3.8 days against a target of 5. It's incredible, and again, testimony to the hard work of colleagues, not just in finance and ICT, but colleagues across the council. Reassuring to note that in terms of business advice requests, that these are being consistently achieved as colleagues in economic growth continue to support our business base, not only in moving forward, but also in doing so against the backdrop of COVID. And we have on page 123 just a small analysis of the work that colleagues in education have been undertaking to support the move to early learning and childcare, and showing that recruitment that Amanda touched on and others, and that's highlighted on page 123. Moving on to the following page, and we can see as colleagues earlier on have spoken about around this, the indicator here for tenancy sustainment, and it's really incredible that we have a figure of 86.9%, which is a vast improvement on the previous figure for the same time last year. But we can see in that paragraph the range of supports and the mixed and varied range of supports that are in place to support and sustain those tenancies. Void rent loss continues to be an area where Bob and myself continue to discuss and find ways to improve further. And the average days to re-let showing is red on the page, but you can see in the paragraph at page 125 that it's a mixed bag across the landscape of East Ayrshire, where some areas really outperforming and some where there is work taking place. I have to be honest with members here and say that the paragraph sets out, in really stark terms, the challenges being faced by the service around removing, getting folk into tenancies and improving void rents loss. And you can see here that, COVID, material supply chain issues in a whole number of other areas have impacted on this indicator. But I know from the discussion at Cabinet that colleagues are working to take these matters forward wherever possible, recognising that those challenges haven't just gone away, and certainly the supply chain issues remain a real and sore area for colleagues to work on. This page as well, at page 125, gives members information on the catering service and on the, I have to say, the unique and incredible work that this council has undertaken in terms of COVID-19 response. And it sets out in detail the amount of meals delivered, the amount of gift cards issued, the attendance at community larders, and then also the work to support young people, as colleagues have mentioned earlier, including Charles, around the summer activity programme. and that's there for members' approval. And over the page, some further information around the sustaining of our community larders. And just finally on page 127, the indicators here on delayed discharge and on the number of looked after and accommodated young people. Members will be aware, because of the briefings coming through the Chief Exec's office and also from other meetings that colleagues and members will have had, that the delayed discharge that has been so well managed by the Council over so many years continues to be that well managed, but there are real challenges at present being experienced in acute and in health and social care. But colleagues continue to maintain that standard against an exceptional challenging backdrop. And in terms of the number of looked after and accommodated young people, that's increased, but as I set out in the paragraph, COVID, as Charles touched on, has had quite a significant impact on that. Members, I don't see any hands in that. With your approval, Chair, I'll just continue on to complaints, if that's okay. Noting at page 129 the work that Ian and the team have done on revising our whole complaints procedure, taking account of the work and the update provided by the Scottish Public Services Ombudsman and their complaints model and their complaints handling procedure. And so you'll see in the not only in the paragraph at the foot of or the top of 129, but you'll see in the tables that we've also got new categories included as well. It sets out the complaints achieved through that period. We have, as we've said in the past, endeavoured to learn from any issues that we have, and at the foot of page 129 we set out the improvement actions that have been considered and accepted by services in terms of some of the complaints they've had. And over the page, at page 130, we can see the average days to deal with those complaints. We've seen a reduction in that performance, and colleagues are working to improve that as we go forward. And just moving on to the risks that begin at page 132, and members will be aware that work will commence shortly on the 22-23 revenue budget. The Council's medium-term financial plan will be updated. We have dates now for the autumn budget, which will be at the end of October. We know that the Scottish Government intend publishing their medium-term financial plan and financial strategy on the 9th of December. And so we're on that road now, that journey to the 22-23 budget. In terms of the risk 1B, the income collected by the Council, we continue to monitor that. We have the benefit of having members that are supportive of services and supportive of allocating that COVID recovery money to support services through this period. And in terms of the impact at 1C on the economic climate and demand for services, we continue through council tax and we continue through BOB and rents to support those most in need. We have the discretionary housing payment Scottish Welfare Fund in place. Members will receive a briefing shortly on the low income pandemic payments, which are already alive, but we're bolstering that further in terms of further work on that to make sure that all those who need that money get that money, and you'll get a briefing at the beginning of next week, members. And we can see at 2A and the withdrawal from the European Union. We can see in the report that there are issues with supply chain as listed in the previous comments. And I think just moving on through those report and taking us to the 10B and 11 around climate and the work that the colleagues continue to do. It's listed as a red risk, and we continue to monitor that. And in terms of the final risk at number 11, the pandemic, I've spoken for a while now on this report, on the numbers and on the finances, and the paragraph here goes into detail on individuals and on cases. And it highlights the work that colleagues and partners have done to try and support East Ayrshire through the pandemic. It notes the cases that were positive as at the 1st of September, and it shows the uptake on vaccinations amongst the 16 to 17-year-olds as colleagues across the partnership, across the council and partners, work to take forward the vaccination programme and to support not only the council but individuals, residents and families and businesses as we go forward. Chair, the recommendations for GNS are listed at paragraph 3 on page 86, which is to note the paper.
Thanks, Joe. Just before we do that, could I refer you to, what's my page numbers? 133, it must be the financial risk 2B, where it talks about the relevant offers continue to the equal pay, equal value. It says it's now anticipated that all remaining offers will be made to claimants by the end of September 2021. Is that up to date, or is there a hold up, David?
We weren't quite there. We were down to the last 30 by the middle of September, so we're not quite there, but it'll be done sooner rather than later. But of 900 offers to be issued in the second wave, we're down to the last 30, Chair.
That's fine. Thanks for that, David. If there are no issues, members, as Joe said, can I refer you to the recommendations on page 85? Sorry, Maureen, you wanted in, sorry.
Thank you very much, Joe. Joe, it's just to ask, please, for some confirmation of exactly where within the risk register would the supply chain issues, material issues, particularly I'm thinking about New Cumnock and the flood prevention scheme, which has to be a real concern in terms of the briefing that we had very recently in relation to problems with cement. So where would we be looking at that within, just for a classification within our risk register, please?
Thank you, and through you, Chair. This is almost a risk to the council, but also to others. In terms of the management of that risk, it's sitting in relevant service risk registers. It hasn't made its way yet to the corporate risk register, but I give members assurance that the discussions that we have on a continuous basis on not only service-based risks, but on the corporate risk register at both EMT and CMT, that supply chain as a whole, not just with the cement, but across the board, if needed, will be brought to the corporate risk register in due course.
Thank you, Joe, for that. Obviously, my concern is, we know the huge impacts that failures on flooding has occurred in New Cumnock in the past, in particular, and of course, what potential harm there is to the corporate credibility, really, of the council to be able to manage that, should we be unable to actually complete because of supply chain issues. So, that has to be a concern for us.
David, you want to come in?
Yeah, thanks, Chair. Through you, just to supplement what Joe said, while individual impacts on particular projects would be properly recorded in service level registers, there is the entry and the risk at the corporate level at item 2A under financial risk, which has been there for some time, albeit pre-Brexit. Under the Brexit heading, but the potential for the impact on supply chains has been one of the many potential impacts of Brexit over the last several years, both pre and post the happening of it. So it is there at the strategic level under risk 2A. It's referred to impact and supplies of goods, services, etc. So at a strategic level, it's always been covered by that one at 2A, but it also would be sitting in individual service registers if there's major strategic programmes that are now getting impacted on for want of materials, etc., etc. So they should be read together.
Thanks very much. David, does that of recognition councillors?
Sorry, you're breaking up, Maureen. Could you repeat that last bit, please?
It's just to say, does that take account of reputational damage to the council as well?
It simply notes the risk of an impact, an adverse impact in the supply chain in all its aspects. Obviously, there are many implications if we have those impacts. It simply notes that we are continuing to keep all of these under review. I think, to be fair, I understand your point, Councillor Mackay, but I think if we find ourselves in a position where we can't deliver a major capital project for want of supplies, there'll be bigger issues for us in terms of contracts, liabilities, claims, etc., than simply the reputational damage. It's hard to answer that because at the end of the day, anybody looking at it who sees a situation where we can't deliver something because we can't get the materials, you would hope there wouldn't be reputational damage, because at the end of the day, you can't build what you can't build if you don't have the materials. But in general terms, the point of the risk register is to note the risk in all its aspects and to promote consideration of how we mitigate it in all its aspects. But as I say, the priority in terms of supply chain would probably not be reputational damage, it would be alternative sources and trying to get programmes delivered. But yes, to the extent that might be an issue, then that would be one of the things we would keep under review when we're dealing with issues at an operational level and try to deliver programmes in the face of impacts on the supply chain.
Okay, Maureen. Katie, I think you want to come in?
Thanks, through you, Chair. I just wanted to offer some reassurance to Councillor Mackay and other members in terms of our awareness of this and that we're keeping it under constant review. And yes, New Cumnock and other areas of East Ayrshire are prone to flooding, and we've put major investments in place. But what we're doing is making sure that all of our mitigating arrangements, our flooding scouts and all of our resilience arrangements are really sharp and ready to respond in the meantime, and that we've got a number of other approaches that we do now in partnership with Scottish Fire that's really greatly improved our response whilst we are waiting for some of this mitigation work to be completed in the larger scale. So I think it's really, really important that, and also that we're engaging deeply with our communities in terms of flood response and winter resilience. And in fact, now have over 100 groups who are responding to winter resilience. So in terms of our reputation in communities and trying as best as we can to work alongside them to keep them safe around flooding and other resilience issues, they're part of that partnership with us. So we're keeping it under close review. It's been disappointing for us, but we are pushing through. And as you know, we have completed one of the major flood defence down in one part of New Cumnock, and this is the second part, and it is a really large engineering project. So we are aware of it. We're disappointed in the delay. We're pushing forward as hard as we can, but behind the scenes, we have people absolutely ready to stand up in response on a partnership basis to any incidents of flooding across the organisation through our resilience arrangements in the meantime. So I hope that offers some kind of immediate kind of reassurance to members of this committee.
Thanks, Katie. Members, can we move to page 85, paragraph 3, the recommendations? Can we agree the recommendations listed there? We've agreed. Thank you. We'll now move on to item 10, which is Joe's last piece, the annual Treasury Management Review. Back to you, Joe.
Thank you very much, members. This is the look back. It's the 2021 look back at our Treasury management arrangements. Now, members of this committee will know that there are 3 reports for Treasury management that are presented to this committee and to Council. This report goes to Governance and Scrutiny and then makes its way to Council too. And that's because the first of those reports is the one that's approved by full Council. It is the strategy for the year, and this strategy that we're presenting today was approved by full Council in March 2020. We're required, once the strategy has been set, to provide a mid-year report on what's happening with Treasury management, and that was presented in January 21, and then there's this report which captures all of the year and sets it out in detail for members both here and at Council in October. And the important messages from this report is that the regulatory process that is required for Treasury management those Treasury indicators that you set as council are monitored and managed throughout the year. And I'm pleased to report, as noted at paragraph 8, that I can confirm that the council has complied with all of the requirements under the code for 2021 and that the necessary scrutiny has taken place within those reports to this committee and to council. In terms of the story of the year, it starts off with the reprofiling of the capital programme away back in November last year, where we moved some capital plans from that year to this. When that happens, it means that there will be less work done. From a Treasury management point of view, that then means there's less borrowing, and you'll see that at the table 1. And I think it's important that this report highlights that was due to a number of factors. It was due to suppliers and external contractors furloughing staff way back at the beginning of the pandemic, and it then touches on, as Councillor Mackay and others have noted, the issues around supply chain. So we note here at paragraph 15 about £20 million of less borrowing than we had imagined, than we had planned, than you had approved in March 2020 that took place. To take you to paragraph 24 then at page 142, and this sets out some of those prudential indicator limits, the capital financing requirement, which is a key indicator, and I'm pleased to say that was met and achieved throughout the year. But you can see at this table at paragraph 4 that the bottom row is around information on whether the council is over borrowed and under borrowed, and it's a phrase you've heard me use in the past about we as a council are under borrowed. It essentially means that we are spending money on capital. You would traditionally go and borrow that, but we are not doing that at the moment. We are using our own money. We are using our reserves to fund that expenditure. It means that we are under borrowed and we need to go to market and take borrowing at some point. This is about Treasury management and managing risks. It's about our investment, our money, and if it were invested, would receive an interest rate of 0.1%, whereas our borrowing is substantially more. So we use our own money. We are prudent to do so, but it's a process we manage carefully throughout the year. Draw members' attention to table 5 at paragraph 28, and what this does, another key indicator, it essentially asks a very basic question. In terms of your Treasury management policy, in terms of the capital programme that you run, how much of that debt is consumed by the pound in council tax and the pound in rent? And that's listed at paragraph 28 for you. Key indicators for this council, key indicators for external partners too. And we continue to monitor that and manage that around the affordability of the overall capital programme. As members know, I've said it many times, we touch on paragraph 35 and page 144, what's happening globally. And there was a hint of negative rates for investments for a while. That is still there at the Public Works Loan Board. And we are not in that category because we have investments, we have cash being held by PWLB that means that we do not get negative interest rates, but interest rates and gilts and the like are key factors that we continue to monitor. And just touching on paragraph 40, the borrowing strategy and the control of interest rate risk. And that's relevant, members, because we are under borrowed by around £60 million. So as I sit here, I have used £60 million of reserves in advance of borrowing. That means I need to be absolutely sharp on any movements on interest rates. And so we have our Treasury advisors that support us with that, and they do that several times a day, and we remain alert to that. But all the mood music at this moment in time as noted over the page, is around the issues taking place globally, and we continue to monitor Bank of England rates, and note that they are not forecast to rise substantially anytime soon. But it's a matter that we remain alert to. Paragraph 50 sets out some of the short-term borrowing that we took throughout the year from other local authorities, which is the case. The reserves are set out in paragraph 58, and members, that's a brief run through of the last year's Treasury management. Conclude by saying we complied with those indicators that you set in March 2020. The recommendations, Chair, are noted at paragraph 2 on page 138. They are for this committee to note the reports and to remit the report to Council on the 20th of October.
Thanks, Joe. Members, do you have any questions, any points for Joe? Don't see any. Oh, Ian, Councillor Grant.
Thanks, Joe. Yeah, it's possibly going to be a really difficult time deciding on under borrowing and borrowing at the present rates, when there's all sorts of indicators that we're headed for potentially some quite serious inflation. I mean, this is a possibility. It's not in tablets of stone. But I would just like to point out that there is a third alternative to under borrowing or borrowing, and that is to look very carefully at our expenditure and try and keep a really tight grip on that. If we do that, then the requirement to use money starts to reduce. And I'll just put down a marker that, in such a volatile time as a council, this might be a good time to really look at and examine what we can live with rather than have to replace in order to keep our expenditure low during this coming period, because I do feel that there is really a very strong potential for some major shockwaves in various directions. Inflation's one of them, but also, further unemployment, other risk factors that we've already examined in our level of risk. And I feel that, as a council, I'd like us to consider very carefully if we can hang on to some things a little bit longer rather than spending money on them, because that negates the need to decide whether we're using our own money, borrowing money, or, generally speaking, putting us in the potential firing line. I would welcome your comments, Joe, on that.
Thank you, and through you, Chair. You would expect me to say that I would remain prudent and guarded when it comes to this level of expenditure. We are aware of some of the information that we have at present. We have indicators that show that inflation next year could go to 4% temporarily, but that in itself will present challenges, certainly for the 22-23 revenue budget, but also for our capital plans. The general market overall is one of uncertainty, I suppose, to some extent, Councillor Grant. The whole issue of Treasury is uncertain at best of times anyway. But I accept the points you make. I note that the plans of the council, particularly around some of the big projects around Ayrshire Growth Deal, and other parts of our capital programme, which in themselves, while requiring the council to borrow, will reap benefits to individuals in the communities around community wealth building, which in turn should provide a wider benefit, and that's always in our thoughts and always in the work that we do in terms of the capital programme. It's something the points you make, we're aware of and alert to, and we have a good team that manage our Treasury and really sound advisors that come in and meet with us too. And as I said, are interacting with us several points throughout the day. Should anything occur, but we're going through the early stage of this year's financial plan. you'll see the subsequent East Ayrshire performance reports, and you'll begin to see the bones of the 22-23 revenue budget and work on the capital plan for next year begin to take shape. And as always, members, you'll be involved in that process to give comments, views, and expertise.
Thanks, Joe. If there's nothing else, members, can we move to the recommendations on page 138, paragraph 2? And agree the recommendations? Agreed. Thank you. We're now moving on, members, to the last item on the agenda, item 11, the annual procurement report, and Leslie McLean is going to take us through this. Thank you. Leslie.
Good morning, Chair and members. I'm pleased to present the committee with the Council's 4th annual procurement report and not the 2nd as referred to in the covering report. The report covers the period the 1st of April 2020 to the 31st of March 2021. The report aims to provide visibility to members that our procurement activities are being conducted in accordance with the Procurement Reform Scotland Act, as well as the strategic aims and objectives and key priorities as detailed within the Council's corporate procurement strategy. Now, the annual procurement report summarises the performance and achievements of the procurement activity for the period as mentioned, and it sets out how we reflect that in terms of both national and local policies and priorities, and in terms of minimum requirements as laid down in the Reform Scotland Act. The report provides a summary of the Council's regulated procurement activity. What do we mean by regulated procurement activity? That is procurement with an estimated value of £50,000 for goods and services and £2 million for works contracts. The report also covers a review of whether these procurement activities comply with our statutory obligations in terms of community benefits, fair working practices, payment of the living wage, compliance with health and safety, and being fair and ethical within all of our procurement practices. The report also extends to reporting of community benefits as mandated and imposed within our contract portfolio. It also covers a summary of the steps taken to involve supported businesses within our procurement activity. It also provides a summary of any future regulated procurement activity which we are due to undertake over the next 2 years. But I've also taken the opportunity to include some additional information within the report which provides spend by service, some of the contracted spend profile over the past 3 years, a trend in our non-contracted spend, a cash savings overview, and the Council's procurement team's response to the COVID-19 pandemic. So if I actually take you to page 8 of the report itself, this gives you a detail of the summary of the regulated procurement activity completed. As I mentioned previously, the regulated procurement is for procurement activity above £50,000 for goods and services and £2 million for works contracts. And table 1 shows you that we actually conducted 21 regulated procurement activities. This doesn't show a true picture of the amount of work that the procurement team do in the period. We actually delivered 114 projects within the period. However, most of them were construction-related programmes. However, they were below the £2 million threshold. So it's just to give you an indication of, we're not just sitting 10 of us doing 21 projects a year. We are a very, very busy team. The breakdown of that, we only delivered 2 regulated works contracts, 16 service contracts, the majority of those service contracts being health and social care, and we had 3 supply of goods contracts within the period. If I take you to the low value procurement activities, the team conducted 437 low value quick quotes. So the low value quick quotes are for spend under £50,000, which do not have any sort of current contracted arrangements in place. Most of those quick quotes we published do get issued to local suppliers to give them the opportunity to bid. because as you'll reflect in our corporate procurement strategy, one of our strategic actions is to ensure that we're inviting local businesses to engage with us and to try and bid for public sector works. So if I take you on to page 10 of the report, I'm actually going to just touch on a couple of these points, and this gives you details of how our procurement activity actually complies with council standing orders, the council scheme of delegation, and it also complies with domestic and the current European legislative requirements. We have quite a robust governance framework which we have to work within, and all of our procurement activity has to be compliant with that framework. So in terms of, I'll just touch on what we do in terms of making sure that we are actually meeting those governance arrangements. All of our regulated procurement activity, we do carry out quite robust commodity strategies. That looks at market intelligence, it looks at engagement of SMEs, third sector and voluntary organisations within our contract portfolio. We look at community benefits, sustainability, environmental considerations. We look at different delivery models. So it's quite an extensive list, and that's before we even actually start drafting a tender document. So it's just to give you assurance that we do consider all of these things before we actually go out to tender. Everything we do within our procurement activity is done in a transparent and open manner and is without discrimination. We do not discriminate against any party, any supplier or anybody. So everything we do is very transparent and very proportionate. We always comply with the Council's Sustainable Procurement Duty and the National Sustainable Procurement Duty. As part of that, how do we actually govern that internally? As part of our procurement activity, every regulated procurement has to undergo a sustainability test. That is an online test, and it is a test that has been developed by the Scottish Government and Scottish Procurement. As I said, it's online, and our contract administrators, before they actually conduct any procurement activity, before we put it out to tender, have to actually undertake that assessment, and that toolkit has to be discussed with procurement, and that some of the recommendations coming out of some of the toolkit actually gets built into the tender document. So again, it's just to give you assurance that we are taking sustainability, carbon management very, very seriously within our procurement activities. Community benefits, this was actually mandatory under the Procurement Reform Scotland Act. We have to consider community benefits in all of our regulated procurement activity, and we do that. That is built in as a standard requirement within all of our contract packs now. And payment of the living wage, the Council will be aware that we received living wage accreditation on the 16th of April 2020. And living wage is always encouraged across our supply chain in everything that we do. Members will note that we cannot mandate payment of the living wage, but we do actively encourage it, and we do monitor our suppliers in conjunction with colleagues within HR every year. That we actually conduct an exercise to make sure our contracted supply chain are adhering to that. So just to touch on a couple of them, I'm actually going to take you to page 14 now in terms of the community benefits summary for the period. Members will note that it was very, very challenging last year, huge challenges across our wider supply chain. You'll note that for the majority of the period that has been reported, our supply chain was basically closed down for the best part of a year and had their staff furloughed. A lot of staff premises closed, so it put immense pressure, not just on us as a team and us as a council, but it put immense pressure across the whole supply chain. So to report community benefits on the reporting period, it actually proved very difficult. And that was because, again, a lot of our service providers, suppliers and contractors, they've had staff furloughed. They're actually just starting to get back into their work programmes and their delivery programmes, and to obviously service council contracts. So it's been very, very difficult to obtain and collate any community benefit information during that period. However, I do think it's pertinent to mention the very, very positive support and contributions provided by our supply chain partners during that period. because we had many of them actually donating equipment, PPE supplies, many of them providing volunteer support and other resources to assist the council's efforts to minimise disruption across our communities. Just to give you an example of some of the work that our supply chain done, we actually had some of our ASN taxi drivers taking some of our most vulnerable in our communities to hospital appointments, collecting prescriptions and delivering them to their doors, delivering food parcels. And again, as I said, in terms of PPE items, we're actually getting a huge amount of donated PPE items to assist our integrated health and social care frontline staff. And to be honest, without it, I think we would have been quite in a perilous position, especially at the start of the pandemic, when PPE items just were not coming into the country. So again, it's just a bit of a dedication to our supply chain partners of the value contribution that they made through the period. I'm now going to take you on to page 15 of the report, which is our supported business summary. Now, the Council, we are committed to supporting and improving access to procurement opportunities for our local suppliers, for our third sector bodies, social enterprises and our supported business community. Again, during the period, our spend was actually quite low, just shy of £2,000, and that was through the Ayrshire Roads Alliance purchasing signs from one of our supported businesses. However, I'm pleased to report that this year we've actually made quite extensive inroads with one of our local supported businesses, Hansel Alliance, and those engagements continue. We are looking at awarding a contract to them this year for the council's hanging baskets. But at the back end of those conversations, and those very, very positive conversations, Hansel Alliance have actually got groundkeepers that are obviously trying to get qualified, get their skills and their attainment up. And we've actually put Nick Kelly and his team at Outdoor Services in touch with Hansel Alliance, and there's going to be a wee bit of joint working in terms of training and skills development coming from the back of the conversations. So hopefully in next year's report, I'll be able to report some more positive news in relation to what we're doing in relation to that work. I'm not going to touch on the future regulated procurement summary. We do have a legal obligation to report our annual wave plan 2 years in advance, and we do have a summary. That summary is uploaded to the council's website. It is easily accessible, and it gives local providers and our supply chain access to what procurement activities and opportunities are coming up over the next 2 years. As I said, I've taken the opportunity to put in some additional sort of slides in terms of best value and monetary savings. I'm not going to dwell on these too much. It just goes into detail about our spend by department, the council's contracted spend over 3 years. It was down on the period last year, and that was attributed to some of the COVID-related spend. We actually had to put some PPE items into manufacture just because it wasn't available in the country through our contracted supply route. So again, we used some local providers to put some stocks into manufacture. Most of you will be aware of the Harry Potter company that make all the Harry Potter outfits down in Stewarton. So they actually put over 100,000 masks into production for us to support our frontline integrated health and social care partnership staff. And we also had to put sanitizer into production. So that's why there's a sort of downturn in contracted spend in terms of that report. And just to take you on to some of the savings, we do capture our savings across the council's contract portfolio at a national level, which we class as category A. So these are our national contracts put in place by Scottish Procurement. The category B contracts are the Scotland Excel contracts, and the category C savings portfolio are our own local contracts. So we've actually increased our savings in the period. It was 1.96 million in the previous reporting period, and we are now at 2.1 million for this reporting period. A lot of those savings can be attributed to the purchase of IT equipment. And as members will note, that we had to purchase a huge amount of IT kit to enable the workforce to work from home. I'm now going to take you on to page 22. And I think, again, I think it's just to recognise the amount of work and the dedication and the support of the Council's procurement team during the pandemic. Our role was pivotal in ensuring that our frontline services and communities and businesses were supported and protected. We are only a very small team, there are only 10 of us. We are very responsive to our customers' needs and requirements, and we did have to adapt to our procurement approaches. And some of that can be evidenced, and I have actually bullet pointed some of the sort of key examples of the work that we've done during the period. Right at the start of the pandemic, we have huge knowledge and experience within the team, and I think it was recognised that when we'd seen what was happening across Europe and the whole supply chain in countries being put into lockdown, we recognised that there were going to be issues across the supply chain with getting stocks, maybe getting deliveries and things to our frontline staff. So very, very early, sort of late February, going into March, we recognised the need that we would need to establish a centralised PPE store within the council. The creation of that store was instrumental in the efforts to secure vital stocks for our partnership, for education and for our early childhood centres, as well as some of our manual and craft operatives and cleaning and catering employees, who were obviously there to support our communities and to support our frontline staff. It was a huge logistical operation, very much supported, and I can't thank our health and safety team enough, because David Dorrans and his team were very, very supportive of the work we had to do. As I said, it was a very, very challenging and logistical nightmare at the time. We did do it very, very quickly. We raided every cupboard within the council and we centralised it down at Burnside Street. We took over the Haas store. I think much to the amazement of Haas colleagues when we just turned up with vans just getting kitted out full of PPE. But it really did stand us in fabulous stead because we did not run out of any stock. I'm not going to lie and deny that it was, I think sometimes we were flying by the seat of our pants, crossing our fingers in the hope that we would get the supplies in time, because what we did not want was to actually have to stand down any of our critical services, because we knew how that would impact across our communities and across some of the most vulnerable in our communities. So it was just to recognise that piece of work. But subsequent to the operation of our own centralised PPE store, the government had recognised the really good work that we had done, and they had asked us to coordinate a logistics store for our external care providers. So the NHS hub was set up down at Burnside Street as well. So we were actually operating the two stores in tandem. So the NHS PPE hub was the stocks were provided by the NHS, and we coordinated the logistics and deliveries of all the PPE stocks out to our local care homes, out to our East Ayrshire Carer Centre, and out to our care at home providers and our social care providers within the area. That store is still operational. I'm still doing the oversight and the strategic management of that. However, the daily operations are sitting with Haas staff at the moment. So again, it's just to recognise that crucial piece of work, because I think without it, our external service providers who are delivering that critical care packages for our, as I said, for our most vulnerable people, I don't think that would have happened, and I think we would have been in quite a bad place. We have utilised a huge amount of our network of suppliers and contractors within the period, and again, that's testament to the network and the dedication and experience and skills of my own team. Some of our contacts go back many, many years, including contacts in Europe and Asia. We pulled out all stops to get vital stocks at the time, and it's just to say thank you to our network of contacts that we were able to deliver our crucial frontline services, because without them, again, I think we would have been in quite a bad place. I mentioned previously we are only a small team. We are only a team of 10. So even with all of this going on, with the two stores running, back and forth trying to secure goods and services, making sure that all of our services were supported. We actually seconded 4 of our staff to support the track and trace phone calls. The 4 staff were sort of seconded out of the team for the 6-month period. And again, that's testament that even being a small team, we pooled our resources just to make this happen and to deliver excellent and efficient services for the council. What we also done was we took the opportunity to maximise support to our suppliers, contractors and service providers. The Scottish Government had issued some policy notes in terms of supplier relief payments. So as you know, the outbreak was unprecedented and did have a significant impact across our businesses. And failure to take action may have resulted in many of our suppliers struggling to meet their contractual obligations to deliver those services to the council. It could have actually put them to it could have actually put a lot of our suppliers into financial risk. So the supplier relief measures that we took managed to stabilise some of the financial viabilities of some of our supply chain. It allowed them to retain staff. It allowed them to work with their supply chain to make sure that we were getting our deliveries, and it just ensured that the cash flow was maintained and that they could receive advance payments. And again, we put in the additional support needs as an example there when we made advance payments to our taxi providers, because they are critical to some of the supports for our additional support needs service. And without it, we could have actually had some of our transport operatives going into liquidation or administration had that cash flow and had these measures not been put in place. We also took the opportunity to issue a questionnaire out to our supply chain and to our local contracted supply market, just to see where the pinch points were and just to see what measures we could put in place to mitigate against some of the pressure points that they were meeting. So as part of that questionnaire, we'd asked about their staffing, what issues they were facing in terms of transportation, logistics, supply chain pressures, and we were able to map that and be able to give them advice and guidance and a bit of support through our economic development team. We were also able, on a case-by-case basis, to look at extending and reviewing some of our procurement practices. So you'll be aware that our council standing orders in terms of consultancy projects is usually got to be tendered over £10,000, but on a temporary basis, we have reviewed some of our procurement processes just to be a wee bit more flexible, just to take into account just some of those pressures and to identify some solutions on a case-by-case basis, just to make sure that our supply chain pressures were mitigated. Again, the Scottish Government had issued policy notices in terms of our construction portfolio, and we worked very closely with colleagues in legal services and Simon Bellany's team to do a full review of the construction project pipeline, and that included a related programme of procurement activity for our construction contracts. Members will know that we actually had to stand down our whole tender portfolio last year. However, that didn't stop all the prep work having to be done when our construction works projects were coming back online. So we did issue a holding position to delay our programme, and arrangements were put in place to mitigate against costs arising from delays to that programme. So as part of our COVID response, I thought it was a good idea just to reflect that in the report, to ensure that that our efforts through the COVID period were recognised, because, as I said, we are a small team, and I do believe that we've done a fabulous job. So it was just to recognise that.
Chair, sorry to interrupt, Leslie, just through you, Chair, I'm conscious that, and members will have picked up from Leslie's reference to the page numbers, that Leslie's had the benefit of not having to sit through the earlier 150 pages of reports that members have been through this morning. It was just to say I'm happy if members are happy. Leslie, you've more than covered the paper. The reason, Chair, through you, I'd invited Leslie along is I can't do it justice compared to Leslie's knowledge and professionalism and indeed her enthusiasm for the cause. I'm loath. I think we have covered everything in terms of the report, and through you, Chair, if you're happy to see if there's any members' questions or issues. I thought it was important to let members know what some of the issues were during COVID, and I thank Leslie for covering them. But as I say, it may well be now appropriate, unless there's anything else Leslie specifically wanted to cover, to bring it to a close, other than members' points of interest or questions. Thanks.
Thanks, David, and thanks, Leslie. It brings a whole new context to the thing that, if you can say broadly the council dealt with the COVID, but when you show the practicalities of it all and what we had to overcome, a big thank you on our behalf to not only your own members of staff, but all the council members. I think we've done extremely well. Councillor Grant, I think you had your hand up. You want to speak, Ian?
Oh, thanks, Chairman. Yes, Leslie, my goodness, what a year you've had. I don't think there's a single word in your job description that would have prepared you for what you had to do. And also, I don't think there's a single word in that job description that said that you were going to be in a position where you're able to save lives, and you have done that. So, I can only say, if I had a tray with 10 medals on it right now, I'd like to come down and put it on to all of you and your staff, because you surely deserve it. And I don't think I'm the only person sitting here that feels the same way. Well done doesn't cover it, but that's the best I can come up with, so well done.
Thank you very much, Councillor Grant. I'll pass those comments on to the team.
Thanks, members. If there's nothing further, we can refer you. Oh, sorry. Gordon, you want to come in? Sorry.
Yeah, thanks. Leslie, thanks very much. Sorry, can I go ahead?
Yep.
Okay, thanks very much for that, Leslie. I'll just a couple of wee questions. Could you just say a few words about the way we work with Scotland Excel and procurement, and also any work we do with the supplier development programme to actually help our suppliers?
Yes. Yeah, no problem, Councillor Jenkins. In terms of Scotland Excel, you'll be aware that we are one of the participating members of Scotland Excel. We utilise over 60 of their contracts. During the COVID period, we actually, as a service for self within our council, we took the option just to basically utilise our own contracts. We did look at the Scotland Excel contracts and frameworks that were in place. However, they were being maximised out. A lot of the supply chain pressures were impacting on the Scotland Excel frameworks, and I tried to sort of make reference that the skills and experience in some of the network of contacts that my own team do have, we decided that that was the right method and the right way and the right route for our council to take. So we maximised on our network of contacts to make sure that our frontline staff were protected and that we could get our critical supplies and services to our services as and when they needed it. In terms of your secondary question, what do we do in terms of supplier support? We work very, very closely with colleagues within economic development and the supplier development team. We go out and we actually discuss procurement activity with local businesses. We actively support them to bid for work. We have reviewed a lot of our processes, all of our tender activity we do on a case-by-case basis. So we do consider as part of our strategy documents how difficult or how problematic some of our contracts could possibly be for our local SMEs, third sector and supported businesses. And we actually look at how can we make that easier to allow these local providers to apply. So we actually start stripping them back to make it easier. But we do that in conjunction with economic development and the supplier development programme. we give training, we give the support. So that's all in place, and we'll continue to do that through the community wealth building pillar, which procurement is one of the 5 pillars. So we'll continue to do that work.
Thank you very much, Leslie. You've answered my questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor.
Councillor Todd, Jim, you wanted in?
Thanks, George. Thanks, Convener. Leslie, can just pass on the thanks of the Resilience Hub at Shortleys, the food larder there. The guys and lasses down there, I worked really closely with them all last year. And they knew that the procurement services that were in place kept everything going. I don't think at any time there was any delay in any equipment that was needed by the Resilience Hub, and that's all thanks to you and your team. So on behalf of them, please pass over their thanks and my thanks for a job well done. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor Todd. That was very, very good of you to say, and I will pass on those kind words. Thank you.
So if that's all, members, can we recommend can we approve the recommendations at paragraph 2 on page 151? And that only remains for me to thank you. Sorry, it's been a long meeting. That's nearly 3 hours. But thank you all for your attention, for attending, and for your contributions this morning. Thank you. Have a nice weekend, everyone. Thank you.